recognition of guest, the Honourable Premier.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and welcome back to all of my colleagues for another day of debate in the legislature, and hi to all those who are working at home, watching from home, and our media members who bring the news to those who can't be here every day, Mr. Speaker. Today, it's great to look around and see everyone wearing our purple ribbon, Mr. Speaker. That shows our support for the International Day of the Elimination for Violence Against Women, Mr. Speaker. I know the Minister responsible for the status of women will have a ministerial statement after question period about the Purple Ribbon campaign, Mr. Speaker, but raising awareness about violence against women and children, Mr. Speaker, is not just something we should do every day in this today, Mr. Speaker. We should do it every day in this province. So. Also, Mr. Speaker, I was pleased this morning to host a virtual roundtable with 12 island export companies with the British High Commissioner to Canada, Mr. Speaker, Her Excellency Susan Lejeune Daljerzic, excuse me, Mr. Speaker. Our two jurisdictions enjoy a positive trading relationship. The United Kingdom is our 8th largest export. We participate in the call for two particular reasons. One, the continuity agreement that Canada has signed with the UK now that they have left the European Union will allow trade to continue uninterrupted, and it's business as usual for the time being, Mr. Speaker, which is a huge sigh of relief for those who export to that country from our province. And also, Mr. Speaker, the connection that we have with our environmental aspirations. Our pathway to net zero at 2040 seems to match up quite closely with Prime Minister Johnson's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So there's lots of back and forth conversation on that, Mr. Speaker. A very interesting discussion today, and one that needs to continue. Also, Mr. Speaker, the gifts of love and kindness are everywhere in PEI, it seems, but they're especially more notable as we get close to the holiday season. And it was lovely to see the Great Enlightenment Buddhist Society host a fundraising campaign at the Confederation Court Mall recently to raise money for their care baskets, Mr. Speaker, of which the proceeds go to the distribution and creation of boxes of food, etc., for those who need them, and they've given out over 1,500 in the last 2 years, and that's a lovely gesture, Mr. Speaker. And I congratulate all who participate in that. And finally, Mr. Speaker, speaking of exports, as I had done earlier, PEI is known for exports. When we think of exports, we usually think of food and equipment, but we also do export our creativity and innovation. And one example of that is the Festival of Small Halls, Mr. Speaker, which is started here to celebrate our culture through story, song, dance, and other forms of artistic interpretation that has now been transplanted to places like Australia, and beginning this week, the Isle of Skye in Scotland, the home birth of my friend, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker. It will be online this year, of course, like many events are, but I would encourage all islanders to take a look and check out the Festival of Small Halls and see how it is carried across the oceans, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure we'll see a little bit of ourselves wrapped up within that. So congratulations to all, and enjoy the proceedings, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. That was a lovely statement, and I had no idea actually that small halls had been exported to the Isle of Skye. I grew up not far from there, a beautiful part of the world, and of course I'm one of the imports from the UK to this province, and very happy to be here. The Premier mentioned the Purple Ribbon campaign, and I am looking forward to the announcement, the ministerial statement later on that. It's an incredibly important time when we do remember the 14 women that were shot back in 1989 at the École Polytechnique simply because they were women. And this campaign is not just in memory of those 14 women, it's in memory of women everywhere who die through violence and who are continuing to be abused. And it's also about raising funds for particular groups who do direct work with abused women and women in danger. So it runs till December the 10th. A very important campaign, encompasses World AIDS Day and of course the Day of Remembrance on December the 6th. So like everybody else in this chamber, I'm proud to wear my purple ribbon today. There are 3 PEI women I'd like to pay particular homage to today. 3 women who have set up Mask Central, Prince Edward Island. They are Alyssa McKinnon, Emma Drake, and Sweta Dabu, who they're coordinating a program. Basically, there's three parts to it. People who want to donate masks, these are not disposable masks, these are renewable masks. People who want and have the ability to donate them, and then groups who are able to facilitate the distribution of those masks, and then, of course, people who need those masks, people who may not otherwise be able to afford them. So it's a really wonderful thing they're doing. They've set up a Facebook group. There are now over 100 members in short time. So Mask Central PEI, if you go and look on Facebook, you will find that. And they're really doing fantastic work. So thank you to them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise, and great to rise again today and say hello to all the residents in District 24 that may be tuning in. And for the ones that aren't, I wish them all a great day. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize a great local company, BioVectra, for the recent donation to the CMHA programs. The donation was funded through a physical distancing telethon among BioVectra employees. This is a great example of a community initiative helping out local organizations keep up the great work. And as the Premier mentioned and the Leader of the Opposition, today is an important day of remembrance for the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. And while today may be the day to recognize this cause, we must work every day in our positions as legislators to ensure we are always doing what we can to combat violence against women. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise again today. I'd like to say hello to everyone out in District 4. Mr. Speaker, I really want to rise today to extend my sympathy to the Gass family. Diane Gass passed away last night, and sympathy to her husband Ronnie, to her son Stephen, to her daughter Shelley, who predeceased her, and to her granddaughter Alexis, who I know was the apple of her eye. So on behalf of all the harness racing industry and the minister responsible, I'd like to send my sympathy to the Gass family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise. I just want to give a shout out to the Royal Canadian Navy. Their new latest ice-breaking capable warship is transiting the Strait today. On its way back from Newfoundland. I'm understanding it's on the way to Halifax. So all the best to the Canadian Navy. It's in our waters today, and as they return from their trials that they're actually doing with this new warship. Thank you.
So anyone I missed? No? Member statements. The Honourable Member from O'Leary, Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know you understand the rigors of ice making in a rural rink in Prince Edward Island. Preparing ice for hockey, figure skating practices, and public skates, the ice maker at any community rink is under a lot of scrutiny. And making ice for those who understand the standards of properly scraped ice, flooded ice is required. Imagine doing that in a community that has been declared Hockeyville, Canada for 2017, and on top of that, during a health pandemic, and doing it as a rookie ice maker. The O'Leary rink is a going concern in the town of O'Leary. It's busy the entire winter season, and in this year there's an additional 4 teams playing out of O'Leary this year from the Tyne Valley community due to the neighboring community sports centre being under construction. Hockey and figure skating ice time is at a premium in O'Leary this year. This year's ice maker, Kim McBain Clements, decided to give up her job at Chance's Early Years Centre and apply for the vacant position of ice maker at the O'Leary rink, a position her dad once held a few years back. Kim has become a welcome addition to the O'Leary rink as she takes great pride in her work as a rookie ice maker, just as her father did before her. This constituent of Loch Road and O'Leary Inverness takes her job seriously, is dedicated to her employer and her community, and wants to make the best ice possible for those who play sports at the O'Leary rink. I recently met with Kim to congratulate her on her new position, and I can say she wants to learn and improve at the trade at making ice at a local rink. As the MLA for O'Leary Inverness, I'm very proud to call Kim my constituent and wish her congratulations. She has already accomplished a great deal in maintaining the O'Leary rink as one of PEI's best sheets of ice, which is only fitting as it represents the site of Hockeyville, Canada 2017. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a purple ribbon on today. It's in support of the campaign against gender-based violence. I stand in solidarity with the many women who flee from unsafe situations. I mourn the lives lost due to gender-based violence. My heart breaks for those who cannot escape. I've spoken in this House before about the culture of violence and how much of the solution lies within our men and boys. This campaign is another example of that truth. If we raise boys to hold their emotions in, to endure the trauma they will encounter, to be tough, as if that is the true measure of a man, that's a recipe for disaster later in that boy's life. If we don't give our boys the right tools at a young age, they will grow into men who have more difficulty handling stress, keep their emotions suppressed, and may feel inadequate and alone. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to teach our boys early in life that when they need help, they can reach out and find it. We need to support our boys so that when they grow into fully capable men, they are armed with the tools they need to be able to deal with high-stress situations without resorting to violence. We need to teach them how to seek help after trauma, how to be vulnerable, and why that's so important. So many men out there want or could use help, but I am sure have no idea how to find it or even seek it. Suicide among men is rising. Not only do men lash out at women, they lash out at themselves. It's all connected. The culture must change for the well-being of us all. Violence against women is not a women's issue. It is everyone's issue. And it's our responsibility to find a better way forward. Part of that solution is found in how we socialize and teach our boys. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For more than 20 years, the Santa Claus Parade in downtown Summerside has been a much-loved tradition, and I'm happy to tell you that despite the unique circumstances of this year, it will still be going ahead. But it will be a little different than it has been in previous years, Mr. Speaker. This year's parade will be a reverse parade, with floats parked and spectators driving by them. We'll begin at the Credit Union Place parking lot and travel south on Rufus Street and then left on Water until you end on Heather Moyse Drive, where Santa will be waiting for you to drive by and wave. Due to COVID-19 regulations and restrictions, the annual food drive that is normally organized by Advanced Builders, Advanced Plumbers, and Samuel's Coffee House won't be happening this year. Instead, there will be a Toonie drive with all proceeds going to support Lennon House and the Island Pregnancy Center in Summerside. The Toonie drive will be located at the beginning of the parade route on Rufus Street, so if you're able to donate, please do. The parade is this Friday, November 27th, from 6 until 8 p.m., and I hope to see you there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as noticed. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere asked me how much money the government spent last year on rent supplements. Last year, Mr. Speaker, the government spent $9.2 million on mobile rental vouchers, an increase from $5 million from the prior year. Mr. Speaker, this government supports mobile rental vouchers as they keep people in their homes without requiring them to move to another apartment, house, town, or city. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty asked me to look into the number of beds at Bedford MacDonald House. I can confirm that there are 10 beds at Bedford MacDonald House, along with 2 emergency beds on the main floor, with double as accessible units. Yesterday, I stated that there were 9 beds at Bedford MacDonald House, and Mr. Speaker, my apologies, that was incorrect. Smith Lodge will be opening in the very near future with 9 beds at Smith Lodge. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I also committed to bringing back information for the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Brighton. We have a number of pet-friendly units available in PEI for both seniors and families. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 91.8% of our seniors' units are pet-friendly. The exact amount of pet-friendly units for seniors is 1,026. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, 91.6% of our family units are pet-friendly. The exact amount of pet-friendly units for families is 427. Finally, Mr. Speaker, 57.9% of our seniors units do allow smoking. The exact number of seniors units that allow smoking is 647. I do appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member's suggestions with respect to different standards for different building sections. Yet, Mr. Speaker, it is important to keep in mind that having smoking and non-smoking units in close proximity or in the same building can be triggering for those with health issues, allergies, and those with young children living or visiting these units. Thank you.
No one else? And for our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Our essential workers, teachers, grocery clerks, healthcare workers are groups mostly made up of women, I might say, that this government knows have been greatly impacted by this pandemic. And of course, we talk about it all the time. We refer to these people as our heroes, which they absolutely are. But it's not enough to call these people heroes. We need to show that we appreciate them in how government spends money. As President-elect Joe Biden said the other day, it's not enough to praise essential workers. We have to protect and pay them. A question to the Premier. What does underspending and under-delivering in health, housing and education while overspending on pavement say to these workers?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I've been indicating here for a number of days now, I believe our government has come to the table, Mr. Speaker, with the funds that are necessary, Mr. Speaker, to get ahead or to catch back up with some of the challenges that we face here as a society, Mr. Speaker. I believe if you look at the budget operationally and, of course, with the capital budget, which we've just released, Mr. Speaker, that we have been spending money, Mr. Speaker, at a rate that needs to be there to serve Islanders, Mr. Speaker. And I would agree with the honourable member, our heroes, those people who deliver services here every day, Mr. Speaker, are to be commended. And we're working every day, Mr. Speaker, to make sure they feel appreciated.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We've all heard at this point that the capital budget has a whopping $190 million laid aside for the next 5 years for paving. $190 million. Paving has long been a way for island politicians to give out jobs and to benefit their supporters. Meanwhile, you're announcing the same school builds for the third time, delaying these projects by years. It all sounds awfully like the same old tired politics that Islanders have got used to for so long. Question to the Premier. Are these the types of games that you encourage your government to play with Islanders' health, with Islanders' education, and with Islanders' money?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable leader for his question, and I think a lot of Islanders could say a lot of things about me, but I think same old may not be one of them, Mr. Speaker. We've been trying very, very hard to do things differently here, Mr. Speaker. I guess as the Premier, you inherit a lot of the challenges that have come from the past, Mr. Speaker. I've never once stood here and blamed others, Mr. Speaker, for what we have here in this province. We're trying to work within that, Mr. Speaker, and to make it better. And in terms of these school announcements, Mr. Speaker, all I can tell the Leader of the Opposition is I've only announced them once, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to build them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Strikes me that those announcements were part of last year's capital budget too. So, and I was really pleased, along with the rest of my caucus, to see the announcement, of course, for school renovations and upgrades in this year's capital budget. And then I realised I was equally happy when I stood here last year and remembered that those same promises were made in this very House. I'm honestly concerned, Mr. Speaker, that come next year I will see the same announcements once more. It's like Groundhog Day here in this House. A question to the Premier. Our children's education is not a political game. Premier, you said you were going to be different, and I take your comments well. You know, things have changed. However, why do you continue to announce improvements in the education system without any follow-through?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that we're discussing these important issues for Islanders, Mr. Speaker. I think this is the place we need to do that. When you look at a capital budget, Mr. Speaker, it's drawn out over a 5-year plan, Mr. Speaker, and we have set aside the funds to build those schools, Mr. Speaker. What we re-announced this year, if that's what the Minister or the Leader wants to say, Mr. Speaker, is that we now have a stream because the federal government has changed their parameters, and they've allowed us to access 80-cent dollars to do it more quickly, Mr. Speaker. And I'm excited about doing it more quickly, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to wait 5 years to build these projects. I want to do them now, Mr. Speaker. That's why I'm excited to do it. I'm glad that we announced it, Mr. Speaker, and I cannot wait till it's open and finished, Mr. Speaker, and we can get on to the next ones.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy has led the public to believe that there will be no delay for the opening of the Stratford High School. In the 2018 capital budget, the school was funded with a completion date of fall 2023. A question to the Minister, is your department still on track to finish the high school by fall of 2023?
The honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it's good to finally have this question so we can clear the air in the proper format. I know the honourable member over there was saying stuff on Twitter that was untrue and saying that my department wasn't working on this, which is embarrassing considering how hard they have worked on this file. We are currently working and waiting on the town of Stratford to make the final decision on the land so we can go to tender. But to answer the question, Mr. Speaker, we are not behind.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I might have missed, I didn't hear the very last statement that the minister just made, just that last sentence, sorry. Pardon? It's not behind. Oh, it's not behind. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. It's important to clearly communicate with islanders. Planning work is dependent on timing that the funds are allocated in the capital budget. And I recognize that it comes down to land, as the minister has just said, but it actually doesn't come down to land. It actually comes down to jurisdiction. And when it comes down to education, that is actually the provincial responsibility. So it's not actually the town of Stratford's responsibility to build the school. So a question to the Minister of Finance. What is the completion date in the new high school for Stratford in your capital budget?
The honourable Minister of Infrastructure, Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what I take from what the honourable member over there is saying is that she doesn't want us to work with the town of Stratford, who has a major plan for where they want to put their soccer complex, where they want to put a rink. They're calling it a campus. They've asked us to work with them. We've agreed to work with them. We're waiting for them to move forward with the purchase. So the honourable member who represents Stratford, just so people who are following along at home can assume that the honourable member over there does not support the plans of Stratford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I don't support is a government that's not actually going to be solid on a date of the completion of the Stratford High School, because that's what they want to know. There are two high schools in the Charlottetown family of schools, and both are projected to be over capacity by the time the new high school is built. Charlottetown Rural will be 297 students over capacity, and Colonel Grey by 102. When we talk about overcrowded schools, we're talking about the quality of our children's education and the quality of teaching our hardworking teachers can deliver to our students. A question to the Minister of Education: where will those 400 students go?
The honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have to say, it really has been a pleasure to work with the town of Stratford to get to the point we're at, to do it right in the way they want it, to go towards this campus idea. And Mr. Speaker, we're working hard to expedite it as fast as we can throughout the entire government to try and close these gaps. And Mr. Speaker, what the member alludes to are projections, and it really, these are updated every year. Right now, we will take whatever steps necessary to ensure that our students' learning is put first. We've seen, for example, we put mobile classrooms at West Royalty. If we have to do that in the short term, we will. We'll find solutions. We're about solutions, and we're about putting students first. Thank you very much.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a CBC article this morning, the Premier was quoted as defending his government's record on both the mental health and public housing files by stating, "That's not the government of Prince Edward Island, that's the industry in general. The construction industry is humming at a level, it's overheated. Our money is there. If fixing these important issues were just about money, I'd have them fixed tomorrow. Nope, fixed this morning, sorry, even sooner." I think it's important to clarify that when it comes to the underspending on the new mental health campus, Mr. Speaker, the state of the construction industry has nothing to do with it. In fact, the blueprints for Lacey House and the community program facility have been ready since before this government came into power and were not acted on until very recently. And the blueprints and final plan for the mental health hospital continue to be delayed due to an under-resourced master planning team. So building can't actually begin at all. Question to the Minister of Health. With blueprints already prepared for 2 buildings, why did you not immediately begin construction on the mental health campus when you were first elected? How can Islanders trust that the money allocated for the new mental health hospital will actually be spent this year and not further delayed?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for the question. I think we've had discussion on this issue already in the legislature, but again, I'll repeat, there's a particular process you have to go through. We had to work with the City of Charlottetown to rezone the property. That took a period of time. Obviously, COVID slowed things down as well. Then once we got a second reading through Town Council, then we had to wait for an appeal process to go through and wait that period out. So, Mr. Speaker, all that has taken place now, and we are ready to start construction on the first 2 buildings. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's my understanding that rezoning process started in May of this year, still leaving quite a delay there. But I want to just highlight that, Mr. Speaker, transparency and accountability matter. In May 2018, under the previous government, changes to the Health Services Act were brought forward and passed in this legislature that saw several powers shift from the Health PEI Board to the Minister. The board at the time was so opposed to these changes that the entire membership of the board resigned immediately. We were told at the time that these changes were based on other jurisdictions such as Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia. However, this is not the only model in use across the country, and many experts suggest good governance would place more authority with the board rather than the minister. Question to the Minister of Health, why is it important that you have more authority than the Health PEI board?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, as the member alluded to, that it was the previous government that brought this change in. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely proud and I'm extremely grateful of the work that we're doing currently with the board and with our new chair. Mr. Speaker, we are meeting regularly. We're having great discussions. We're having dialogue. We have great plans moving forward to enhance healthcare here in PEI. Mr. Speaker, I thank the volunteers to step forward, to sit on the board, and they are doing great work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, it seems clear that giving final say and veto power to the minister opens the door to potential political interference when decisions about the operations of our healthcare system should be made on evidence and outcomes. At a minimum, a critical element of defining the relationship between the minister and the board as outlined in the Health Services Act is the creation of an accountability framework to further determine exactly what roles each party is responsible for. Question to the Minister of Health, has this accountability framework been created, and if so, will you table it?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, I'll repeat, we have a great group of volunteers sitting on this board. We have a brand new board chair who's very engaged, very dedicated to the healthcare file here on PEI, served for many, many, many years on the Prince County Hospital Foundation and did great work there as well. Mr. Speaker, I can only say that as we move forward, we're going to see great enhancements here on PEI with regards to health service delivery. But, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, if for some reason the minister wasn't ultimately responsible, I believe she would have a problem with that as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and respectfully, I will speak for myself and let you know when I have a concern about something, as I'm doing right now. It sounds like there has not been an accountability framework created. I will note, though, that I'm glad to hear that the relationship is working well between the minister and the board. Question to the Minister of Health. Since taking on your role as minister, has the board ever made any recommendations that you have not accepted or have altered in any way? And will you table all recommendations made by the board during your tenure and resulting actions?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we do have lots of discussions. I consult regularly with the board. Right now, since we have a new chair, we're even more engaged as Mr. Key gets up to speed on as chair of the Health PEI board. But, Mr. Speaker, certainly I'd be more than happy to bring back any discussions, any dialogue that we've had. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that is great to hear. I'm really glad to hear that. And I look forward to that being tabled. Of course, transparency and accountability are critical to good governance and earning the trust of Islanders. It's important to know what recommendations have been made and what actions were or were not taken as a result and why. Mr. Speaker, I believe one thing this pandemic has shown us loud and clear is the importance of listening to our medical experts and following their recommendations based on evidence. We are all so thankful for the expertise of our Chief Public Health Office, who has been able to provide this expertise led by Dr. Morrison. But I do wonder, and Islanders are wondering too, if Cabinet has altered or ignored any recommendations from the Chief Public Health Office. Question to the Premier. In the same spirit of transparency and accountability, will you table all recommendations made by CPHO and Dr. Morrison to Cabinet and any resulting actions or decisions of Cabinet?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the question. And absolutely, Mr. Speaker, I believe we have demonstrated that when you follow science, when you follow the best information, you get good decisions, Mr. Speaker, even if they're not popular, Mr. Speaker. We've talked at great length in here about the success we've had with COVID, and we hope that continues, Mr. Speaker. And everything that we have done from a health perspective during the time of COVID, Mr. Speaker, has been led by the Chief Public Health Officer, has been led by the health officials in this province, Mr. Speaker. But I would add, Mr. Speaker, we've been highly criticized here for the last number of days over decisions that were made, Mr. Speaker, at the advice of health officials, Mr. Speaker, but blamed on the Minister, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Education encouraged children to use active transportation to reduce traffic in school zones. Yet, the government didn't direct the Active Transportation Fund towards upgrades to school zones to accommodate safer and broader active transportation options for those children. A question to the Minister. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, on top of the 268 kilometres of pavement that we did this summer, we did a number of upgrades and through capital projects on the roads that we own to both widen, and if you go over to the honourable member from Stratford's district, the health minister, you'll see along that school zone we added an active transportation trail. In the cities, if you come into Charlottetown or into Summerside, those are city-owned, they're city-owned streets and they're city-owned projects. So we partner with the city of Summerside, who added to their active transportation trail. We partnered with the city of Charlottetown, who has added to their active transportation trail. It's up to them to decide where they want to put their trail. We don't dictate to municipalities where they should put their active transportation trails. We're here as a partner. This year coming up, we'll have $10 million to put towards active transportation trails in this province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You don't have to dictate. You could maybe even just suggest, Minister. Planning staff in Charlottetown recently recommend rejecting a permit for a developer to build 200 housing units. One of the reasons cited was a lack of active transportation along the route. Paving to help housing is possible here. Has the Minister reached out to see if they can make use of the Active Transportation Fund to help address the issue and help clear the path for a significant housing development?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So ever since the capital budget came down, I heard how much you guys don't like pavement. Now suddenly today you like pavement. Really, really hard to understand whether or not you like pavement. But over here we like pavement. So let's talk about pavement. We have a $5 million fund that groups can apply to, that municipalities can apply to add active transportation to their community. We have $5 million in this budget that we're debating here today in the House, the capital budget, that's going to add $5 million worth of pavement into government-owned infrastructure to both widen and separate paths for active transportation. That's something that as a province we're very, very, very proud that we've done. We're encouraged that there's groups out there that see the benefit of having active transportation pathways to their development, how important it'll be, and we will work with any municipality who wants to put forward a plan to us on how they can enhance their active transportation trail system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During questioning on the special warrant for paving last July, the minister mentioned that he couldn't tell us about the other projects on their agenda until they were funded. his other priorities. Sorry. Later, he told the media about the Sherwood School before he even submitted an application. Let's have some transparency. Let's have some consistency. Let's see some integrity. I'll quote the minister's words. In the past, we have announced things without them being approved, and then they've been later approved. Why don't you share the full list of what you have in development with us so we can see your priorities?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So one thing I will say is everything that we said we would do, we've done. Probably a first for a government here in Prince Edward Island in nearly 20 years. I'm proud of the Sherwood School. I'm proud of what we did. The Sherwood School, when I inherited the file, wasn't at all a net zero school. It wasn't at all something that we could be proud of. It wasn't something that we would send students to and say, you're going to learn about tomorrow while you go to school in this school. What Sherwood is getting in the Sherwood School is exactly that. They're going to get something that we're proud of. They're going to get something that's innovative and new for Prince Edward Island. We're going to get something where they can learn about the changes that they're making in their school to help tomorrow while they learn in that school. That's something that we all should be proud of. So I stand by everything that I've ever said. I stand by the commitments that I made to this House. When I said I was going to do something, I did something. And that's more than the honourable member over there could say about himself. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rule 110.9 of this House states, a written executive response shall be tabled in the House during the next seasonal sitting following the adoption of a committee report. Question to the Minister responsible for climate change. At what point during this sitting can the House expect your formal response to the last report from the Special Committee on Climate Change?
The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Actually, I was in discussions with my department this morning regarding the report and the recommendations, and you can certainly expect something soon. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary, Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, this current government had a campaign promise to fix and improve health care. Today, on the government website, there are 14,530 Islanders on the patient registry. That's up, I might add, by 130 names in just a few days. And according to a national report released from the Canadian Institute of Health Information on October 29, 2020, PEI has the lowest per capita proportion of doctors in the entire country. At the same time, the number of practicing doctors across Canada continues to grow. So why is the Minister of Health struggling to recruit doctors?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for that question. As he knows from his period of time as Minister of Health, it is a challenge to recruit doctors here on PEI. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, we made a great announcement the other day for Tignish, which was lacking a family doctor for far too long. Mr. Speaker, in the same announcement, I mentioned that we had 4 letters of offer out for 4 other doctors, and we're just waiting for those to be signed to come back in. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the work that's being done right now between recruitment and retention at Medical Society PEI, and I'm sure we're going to have more great announcements here in short time frame with regards to additional doctors that are coming to PEI. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary, Inverness.
To point out, the new doctor that has been recruited to Tignish, although very good, is replacing a retiring doctor, and not one of those patients actually are on the patient registry, so that doesn't change anything on the patient registry. The same national report points out that the average income of doctors on the island is the highest in Canada. So money is apparently not the issue. It seems to be a recruitment issue, and it appears to be a failure of this particular minister, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of recruitment failures, to date, we have still not seen what recruiting dividends have occurred from the minister's trip to Ireland last March. Since the minister's strange decision to recruit Irish doctors during the first stages of a pandemic was really 9 months ago, can he update this House on the health professionals recruited from Ireland during that trip?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the individuals we met with in Ireland, for the most part, were Canadian citizens who were studying abroad. So, Mr. Speaker, they're still going to medical school. They haven't even gone into residency program yet. But, Mr. Speaker, as the member would well know, you need to plant the seed in advance so that you can develop relationships with these medical students so that when it does come time for them to choose a province, a jurisdiction to practice in, you're in the forefront of their mind. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to state that the students that we met with have all told us that we were the only jurisdiction that reached out to them, either virtually, by telephone, or in person. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness for second supplementary.
Well, let's hope we start to see some of these doctors actually sign up and come here, Mr. Speaker. But so far, this time in under this minister, we haven't really seemed to recruit much, and we're just watching the patient registries like a ticker. It just keeps going up and up and up, Mr. Speaker. Today, I said 14,530 Islanders without access to a family physician. It's per capita, it's actually the worst record in Atlantic Canada. Even this Doctors Recruiting Doctors initiative will need to recruit a doctor to recruit other doctors, which takes a doctor away from providing health care services to Islanders, Mr. Speaker. When will Islanders expect to see the patient registry begin to decline, Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think if we went back historically 11 years ago plus when this honourable member was in government and for a short period of time was health minister, Mr. Speaker, I think we'd see that things weren't too rosy then. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? It does. It goes up and down, unfortunately. But, Mr. Speaker, we've put other initiatives in place as well. Mr. Speaker, we've done the virtual program with Maple. It has capacity for 10,000 patients to be connected to that service. And so far, the individuals that have accessed that service have had glowing reports. But, Mr. Speaker, just because we're doing something virtually, it doesn't mean we're taking people off the registry, because we still want them to have a doctor in person in place. So, Mr. Speaker, we are doing...
Honourable members, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, although we are still creating new initiatives, such as virtual programs through Maple, I'm extremely proud of what we're doing as a government to provide health care to Islanders that are currently unaffiliated with a doctor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Health on capital improvements at healthcare facilities across Prince Edward Island. Minister, you left a considerable amount of money on the table last year for healthcare facilities. You had approval to spend $4 million and only spent $2 million. Why was your department incapable of using these resources you were provided with, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in March, if you'll recall, all of a sudden we fell into something that was called a worldwide pandemic. And, Mr. Speaker, that completely changed the landscape of everything. So, unfortunately, we had to put the brakes on some things, delay some files. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, we're working very hard to move forward. As you'll see when this capital budget comes to the floor for health and wellness and health PEI, you'll see there's tremendous plans in place to move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for more than 8 months we've known there's issues in our healthcare facilities, yet the Minister chose to leave approved money on the table. Technology upgrades allow for more efficient delivery of healthcare services to Islanders. Yet again, you left money on the table. You had approval for almost $10 million, but only spent $4 million. Why did the Minister choose to cut work that was approved for a year ago?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I'll use the example of what we're going through right now, the pandemic. It completely changed the landscape of what we were able to do. But, Mr. Speaker, there was great initiatives put forward. As we talk about Western PEI, the virtual healthcare initiatives that were introduced up there through Maple, the unaffiliated program for patients without a doctor right now. That was another great initiative. Mr. Speaker, we're working through the electronic medical records. There was a slight delay on that, again, because of COVID. But, Mr. Speaker, again, when the capital budget comes to the floor with regards to health and wellness and health PEI, you'll see the tremendous work that's moving forward and will be completed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from the Third Party, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know there are capacity issues, and too many people need services, and there are too few beds. We saw this with the shutdown of Unit 9. Did the millions of unspent dollars go back into general revenue, or where did that money get spent?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, the decision to shutter Unit 9 with regards to preparations for a potential pandemic outbreak here on Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, that decision was made to ensure that our hospitals were prepared in the case of such a catastrophe. But, Mr. Speaker, as I've said in the House before, although Unit 9 itself was closed, any Islander, any patient that required hospitalization because of their mental health issue received exactly what they required. They were admitted, whether it was at the Hillsborough Hospital, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the Prince County Hospital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's that time of the year again. 1 year ago, I asked the Minister of Transportation what's being done to address the choke point on Route 2 between Portage and West Devon. At that time, he indicated he would instruct his staff to begin looking into the issue and determine what options they have to address this. This choke point is a great concern of West Prince residents, and it represents the only ground route to the rest of the island, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Minister, what options have been presented to the Minister to ensure West Prince is not without a viable ground link to the rest of the island in the event of an emergency closure of Highway 2 at this location?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, as the honourable member knows, we spent a considerable amount of time in his area this summer and on Route 2 as we paved nearly the whole thing from Summerside to Tignish, which some members are unhappy about. Hopefully the honourable member over here is at least happy about it because he's talking about projects and how important they are to his community and to Western PEI, and I think it's something that the honourable member maybe could have a discussion with the Green Party about later to tell them why this is important. But to answer your question, on top of we have looked at what the options are there. We have looked at what the actual risk is of that structure. That structure is a structure that we constantly monitor and assess to make sure that it hasn't lost any of its integrity. But as you know, and we used at the Hunter River project this summer, we bought some Bailey bridges, and those are bridges that are portable, easy to set up, and they're kind of used as a temporary structure. So our short-term plan, unless we can come up with a mega project plan to fix that project or fix that problem, is to use the Bailey bridges to help alleviate any concerns that would happen in the event of a structure failure. That said, we don't feel like there's any great risk of that structure failing. It's not in a tidal area. It's in more of a swamp type area, so it's not a type of estuary that our staff feels would be affected so much by the rising tides or by a storm. But that said, we do have a backup plan that's available. Just thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is very important. In case of an emergency, it could be an accident. It could be anything that could take out a section of that highway, and that is the only access to and from West Prince. So the towns of O'Leary, Tignish, and Alberton the residents of those areas would be really affected by that. And so the short term, and it was a suggestion I had made before, was perhaps the Confederation Trail, which runs nearby from Alaska into Portage, could be used as an alternate route in case of an emergency. Has there been any progress or any looking into that as a possibility?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So yeah, there is. That is a viable option to use, particularly if we're going to get goods in and out. I don't know, if it'll hold the entire daily volume of traffic up back and forth, but that's something that we could also look into a little bit deeper. And as the honourable member knows, that my deputy in that department is from Tignish, so I'm acutely aware of the issues in Tignish. I hear it quite often. So there's lots of voice around the table for you. You can rest assured in my office. And it's not that awful long ago we were looking at the map and we were looking at that Portage area and talking about with our staff what are some of the things we can do there. So it's widely accepted as being an issue, and it's widely accepted that we have to come up with a reasonable solution. At this point, we have what we would call a backup solution in the event of a failure. I know you're looking for more of a long-term solution, and that's something we'll have to continue to try to work towards. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate that, and I do appreciate all the voices that are coming in respect to this concern. And I would appreciate not having to stand up here in a year's time and ask again. So I really want to push the Confederation Trail, though. I think that is a viable option. Could be widened, could be paved, and it could be gated at both ends and open in case of an emergency. So that was something there. So yeah, so many people. So with so many people around the table concerned about this, when can we expect construction to begin?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know the honourable member knows I'm not that reluctant when it comes to paving things, so it wouldn't take a whole lot to talk me into it. That said, I think there's a certain number of stipulations or requirements we need for our Greenway funding that we received a number of years ago for the Federation Trail, so we might not be able to pave it, but I think we can use it on a temporary basis. Look, I'll commit to getting you a written response from my department for what the plan is and the timeline by no later than January, whatever day we come back in January, the 4th, let's say. And I know my staff's listening, so they're probably starting to write the letter right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had a constituent contact me, and they're traveling. Her son and his girlfriend are traveling across Canada back to PEI. They're moving home. And they first sent their letter to border approval on November 18th. And they received some correspondence back on November 21st that they had to send some more information in, which they did. It's now November 25th, and they haven't received an approval or denial letter. And they're traveling across Canada. They received approval to enter New Brunswick. But they don't know about PEI, what they're going to do when they get here. Minister, why is there such significant delays to find out whether you can enter PEI or not?
Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that's a very important question. And as soon as this is over, I'm going to get that name from the member and make sure that they get a response before they hit the bridge, Mr. Speaker. That's very important because during this pandemic, we all are aware of the certain challenges, and Mr. Speaker, this is no excuse, but you know, with the bubble bursting Monday and the announcement, our staff has been very challenged, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say that yesterday we added 6 new staff. So, but to deal with that question, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to get that name so we can address that right away.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These 2 individuals are traveling across Canada as we speak. They said today that they've tried calling. No one's answering the phone. They've tried leaving voicemails, but the inbox is full. Minister, the previous time frame to receive a response was 72 hours. We are now 168 hours in to when they first contacted the office, and they have yet to receive a response. When can they expect to receive a response?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everyone in this House, I hope, is aware, and most people feel that they can reach out to me, Mr. Speaker. A lot of people in this House have reached out with constituents that are in the same circumstance, Mr. Speaker, and I've done my best to help them. And to address the members' questions from Montague-Kilmuir, Mr. Speaker, we are addressing that. We'll be back to 72 hours very soon, Mr. Speaker, because of the Christmas holidays are coming up. People are going to be traveling, Mr. Speaker. Islanders want to come home. They want to self-isolate, but we have to keep the island safe, Mr. Speaker. And our borders right now are of the utmost importance to keep Islanders safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You shouldn't have to contact your MLA to find out if you can get approval or denial of PEI. Minister, this application was sent in before the bubble popped, a number of days before that happened, and there was still significant delay. Now, the bubble has popped since then, and I guess there's concern. I would have concern that there's, with all of the new applications coming in to get into PEI, will there even be more of a delay to get a response back? And are we going to have people showing up at the bridge without any approval documents because they haven't had a response? Minister, what are you going to do? I know you said you hired 6 more staff, but can you go back, look into this to make sure that we can get the response time back down to 72 hours?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Public Safety and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I truly, this is a very important question, and I hate making politics out of something so important, Mr. Speaker. I sat beside this member in caucus, Mr. Speaker. I wish he had brought this to me then, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will address this. I want to first deal with the people he's talking about, Mr. Speaker, but we'll be at 72 hours very soon, Mr. Speaker, and we'll make sure the public safety and the health of Islanders is at the foremost.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lots of governments have talked about the importance of using economic recovery to build back better, but how well we'll do that really depends on what we invest. The OECD released a policy brief last month, which I'll be tabling later. It focuses on opportunity for economic recovery that are green and inclusive. The province has very ambitious climate targets, but without a suitably trained workforce, that transition will be impossible. In fact, the Premier suggested yesterday that labour gaps are the reason we've underspent so dramatically on housing. A question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. Labour shortages are impacting us now. What are you doing to reskill or upskill people to ensure an absence of labour availability doesn't stand in the way of government following through on its promises?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, honourable member. So certainly COVID has brought a lot of this to light, the labour shortages of what's happening in our economy right now, construction being one of them. So during this whole pandemic has made us go through all our programs, through skills, through innovation, go through them to see where the gaps are, what we can do. We've been reaching out to industry on a daily basis, getting their input and designing these programs to move forward.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, at least 30 countries have included measures specifically directed at greening the economy as part of their recovery plan. Now, in fairness, Mr. Speaker, these 30 governments actually have a recovery plan, but I'm sure the Minister of Climate Change would agree that a handful of net zero buildings, which we may not have the workforce to build in the first place, isn't nearly enough to reach government's targets. Question to the Minister of Finance. The path towards net zero document says that the next 5 years are critical to get on track for our targets, and that's right. When will we see capital spending on an island-wide public transportation system?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and honourable member. We've looked through every department to ensure that all the decisions we're making are through a green lens, and including public transportation. It's something that we're working on with possibly through our electric school buses and electric bus transportation. We'll continue to do that, honourable member. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to stand today, because I haven't had questions really since the beginning of this House, but I'd like to maybe rectify or clarify some of the misinformation and the fear-mongering that's been spread by the opposition.
Let's hear it.
The previous 5-year plan for capital spend versus the current 5-year plan for capital spend. Education is up 219%, $113 million. Health is up 191% for $157 million. Housing is up 885%. And I don't really want to share this one because I know the Honourable Minister will be looking for more, but transportation is only up 6%. Wow. So, honourable members, I would like to clarify that. This is the capital investment over the last 5 years versus this coming 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, final question.
Thank you very much. Facts are interesting. Facts can get twisted, facts can be real, facts can be... And I think we all need to read very carefully through the statement that the Finance Minister, who's obviously waiting for some time to stand up and make, the so-called facts that she used. The increase in spending, absolutely there's an increase in spending, only because you didn't spend the money last year. That's why it's such a huge increase in spending. If you look at the budget forecast for last year and this year, spending forecasts have gone down. They've gone down in education, they've gone down in healthcare, they've gone down in housing. They have gone up 33% in building roads and bridges. So, Mr. Speaker, to the Finance Minister, can you bring back some real figures to this House that demonstrate how this government is not following through on its promises to Islanders?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always very interesting. When the opposition do not hear what they want to hear, it's misinformation. I have the facts in front of me. capital spend for the previous 5 years from 2017 to 2022 versus the current capital spend for the next 5 years, education is up in spending 219%, health is up 190%, housing is up 885%, and transportation is up 6%. Those are the facts and figures coming from the Finance Department, and I am more than happy to share them today with the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Extended question period.
Okay, honourable members. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, the Minister response. Oh, sorry.
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Member from Summerside South Drive.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order. Rule 34.2 states that no member shall use language or words offensive towards the House or any member. I believe the Minister of Transportation used inappropriate language that reflected unfairly on my character while answering my questions, and I request that the Speaker take this matter under advisement.
Honourable Member, I will take that under advisement. I will. The Honourable Member from Minister of Environment, Water and Climate Change, Minister for Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and the launch of the Purple Ribbon campaign to support survivors. Each year, the PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women asks islanders to wear a purple ribbon for 16 days from November 25th to December 10th. The campaign raises awareness about violence against women and children here on Prince Edward Island, across Canada, and throughout the world. The theme of the Purple Ribbon campaign this year is Support Survivors. Every year, hundreds of islanders are the victims of violence against women and children. The message of the Purple Ribbon campaign is that there are things we can all do to support victims of violence. Being open, listening and speaking without judgment, and knowing how best to respond. This can have a huge positive impact on survivors and their ability to move forward. As part of the United Nations 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign, ribbons have been provided to each of the members of the legislature. Due to COVID-19, the traditional ribbons have been replaced with ribbon pins. It's certainly great to see you all wearing them today. Show your solidarity with survivors and where you stand in the fight for women's rights. I'm also pleased to announce 4 island organizations will receive violence against women prevention grants this year. These grants help enhance awareness, education, and action towards preventing violence against women in Prince Edward Island. The PEI Family Violence Prevention Services will receive $7,500 to increase awareness of services that support individuals affected by violence and the many ways to access them. This is critical to ensuring women know these essential services are available during pandemic. Action Femme, l'Île de Prince Edouard, will receive $10,000 to shed light on the taboo and secrecy surrounding domestic violence, particularly in small Acadian communities in rural areas. The PEI Rape and Sexual Assault Center will receive $15,000 to build on the success of the Take Back the Night 2020 event here on Prince Edward Island. Take Back the Night raises awareness, supports survivors, and brings attention to the work needed to end sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, sexual abuse, and all other forms of sexualized violence. And the PEI Coalition for Women in Government will receive $15,950 to document experiences of women in leadership during COVID-19, with a focus on online gender-based cyber violence. This work will help women in leadership navigate the best ways to deal with online harassment. Mr. Speaker, we all want to live in a province and a community where people feel safe, respected, and treated well. We all have a role to play. Ending violence against women is everyone's business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every year on this day, we honor the Purple Ribbon campaign to raise awareness and to prevent gender-based violence. As a teacher, friend, family member, and counselor, I have seen the effects of violence, and it is devastating. We all know that this is not a women's issue, and our reactions and solutions must reflect this. Last December, I and many others in this room attended the memorial for victims of domestic violence. I was moved by the words of Dawn Wilson, who shared her story growing up with domestic violence, and her recommendation to change this narrative here on Prince Edward Island. Her recommendations on how we as a province can support women and children living with family violence were clear and concrete. They included financial resources through 1, emergency financial support, livable wages, and a basic income guarantee, 2, island-wide public transit, and 3, affordable, accessible housing. The capital budget was this government's time to shine and show that indeed supporting survivors of family violence is a priority. However, if we follow the money trail, it is evident that this government has not listened. Do we as a province yet understand the connection to lifelong health and to the economy? When members of the official opposition met with various organizations in the community to see how the pandemic affected women, minority groups, and marginalized communities, this is one thing that was loud and clear. We need to better support women, we need to better support children. And we need to work with our men and young boys. We need to change the way we educate and empower boys. And we need to provide culturally sensitive, non-judgmental programming for men. Programming that does not have being incarcerated as a prerequisite for access. We must work harder to change the culture. Last month, the minister responsible for the status of women announced that the Interministerial Women's Secretariat will be ensuring every grade 7 female student gets a copy of the Famous 5 book. That's fantastic. And this is the kind of damaging bias that fuels the social norm that puts the onus on women and girls to deal with gender-based issues in our society. As my colleague stated earlier, violence against women is not a women's and girls' issue. It is everyone's issue. Electric buses were purchased with the public transit money because these buses will be used eventually for island-wide transit. That tells me that there may be a plan coming together for public transit. And housing underspent by $9 million does not show the priority. It's not enough to don our purple pins and say we want to end gender-based violence. It is great to hear the funding being provided to these communities, groups who are doing the work, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that 16 days of activism is not near enough, and I would like to remind the Minister that she is in a unique privileged position to make the systemic changes that are crucial if we are serious about ending gender-based violence. We must take action and put in place the programs and policies that will make real difference. Myself and my colleagues will continue to work towards ending gender-based violence, and I look forward to working with the minister responsible to achieve this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I commend the Minister for bringing this forward and for the increased funding for these 4 local groups. Mr. Speaker, the safety of islanders must be paramount in every action we take and consider as politicians. Mr. Speaker, we know that more needs to be done right now and to eliminate violence against women in our province. Violence against women is an incredibly distressing fact of everyday life for far too many victims. According to the United Nations, 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Alarmingly, 1 in 2 women killed worldwide were killed by their partners in 2017, and 71% of all human trafficking victims are women or girls. Mr. Speaker, these figures should be distressing to everyone in this chamber, and unfortunately we know that violence is a part of everyday life for way too many women. I do want to acknowledge the community groups and organizations that do so much good work and their efforts to reduce violence against women. Organizations such as the Anderson House, Blooming House, and others are all focused on providing safe spaces for women and girls right here on PEI. Mr. Speaker, these groups deserve our full and unequivocal support in their ongoing efforts to curb violence against women here on PEI. And Mr. Speaker, I implore this government to push the envelope further than ever before in our efforts to eliminate violence against women right here on PEI. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister for Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to update the House on an important development for the PEI Analytical Laboratories. Our provincial laboratories located in PEI Biocommons are a great example of cooperation between departments. PEI labs provide testing services for the public, municipalities, farmers, corporations, and other government departments and researchers. Dairy, soil, feed, plant diagnostics laboratory are operated by the Department of Agriculture and Land, and the water microbiology and water chemistry laboratories are operated by the Department of Environment, Water, and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, these labs handle an incredible volume of work. Each year, they are responsible for analyzing 20,000 water samples, 20,000 agricultural chemistry samples, and 300,000 dairy samples, Mr. Speaker. Many of these tests related to food quality, public safety. It is very important that the labs are reliable and that the work is held into the highest standards. The Standards Council of Canada conducts an on-site assessment of the PEI Analytical Laboratory every 2 years to confirm that the lab is continuing to perform tests at high quality level. The most recent assessment occurred March 2020, and I'm pleased to say that our facility has once again passed the test and are fully accredited. With the accreditation, our PEI analytical labs are recognized internationally, Mr. Speaker. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, Islanders that use the labs rely on the results and can be confident that food and water supplies are safe on Prince Edward Island. I want to congratulate Lori Connolly-Brine, manager of the PEI labs, and all the laboratory staff for their work and for their continued maintain an excellent standard in our laboratory services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise to acknowledge the important work that the PEI Analytical Laboratories do here in PEI. This is not an accreditation that should be taken lightly. This is actually a three-day process in order for them to go through it. It's not easy, and I would just like to add my voice to the minister in commending the Prince Edward Island Analytical Laboratories for reaching this accreditation. The health of islanders and the health of our island soil is dependent on the work that the laboratories do. And I think it's extremely impressive when you hear how many tests they actually run in the course of a year. 300,000 dairy samples. Like that's a lot of samples when you think of it in the grand scheme of things. Agriculture is such a vital industry here in PEI, and it is important to have that public trust and safety around the products that we put out in the market. And also with the soil quality and our drinking water, I mean, the work that the laboratory does is incredibly important. I just want to add my voice, like I said, and congratulate all the staff for their hard work year over year and how they keep Islanders safe. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
Speaker, indeed great news, Minister. Islanders certainly rely on these labs for timely and accurate analysis of samples that affect them in some way. I certainly congratulate the staff for their professionalism and their commitment to providing the highest of quality services to help ensure that the safety of all Islanders and the work that they do. And Mr. Speaker, I have to provide a little bit of kudos to the vision of a former Minister of Agriculture, Minister George Webster at the time. I recall sitting in the cabinet and he brought this initiative when they moved out to the Biocommons and the work that they did there. And it was a pretty major investment, Mr. Speaker. And I know it came with many debates, but I was happy to support that and look forward to what would accomplish by those investments. Little did I know that a little later on I would become minister responsible for the labs out there, and I had many meetings out there with some of the staff, and also would take some sense of pride in some of the investments that during my time as minister to see that the standards were upheld. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the former Minister of Agriculture for his vision on that particular issue, Mr. Speaker. And it's like the member for Stratford had mentioned, our farmers certainly rely on the testing facilities of a number of these services, including whether it's chemical, microbiological analysis for water, soil, dairy, animal feed, seed, plant tissue, manure, and compost samples, and disease identification. It's all extremely important, and they have now the accreditation and the capabilities of doing that, Mr. Speaker. Farmers certainly use the lab test results to make informed decisions on improving their productivity, plus, I would add, their profitability for their operations. And these labs have consistently met and exceeded and increased their demands for their services. So this accreditation has been, ongoing over the last many years, and I certainly would want to say thanks to all those involved and congratulate the Minister for making this announcement of its accreditation. Thank you.
The end of statements by ministers. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of this House, I beg to leave to table a document dated government page website dated November 25th. The patient registry numbers, which are now at 14,530, and I move, seconded by the leader of the third party, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a document from the OECD entitled Making the Green Recovery Work for Jobs, Income and Growth. And I move, seconded by Summerside South Drive, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table questions from the floor and capital estimates yesterday, as well as a written question 165 from the member for Charlottetown West Royalty. And I move, seconded by the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table questions taken as notice November 25th, 2020. And I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? No more tabling of documents? Reports by committees. The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Growth, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, that the report of the Committee on Committee Activities be adopted. Your committee is reporting on its activities since last reporting to the Legislative Assembly in the fall of 2019. As a result of its deliberations, your committee is pleased to make several recommendations on various topics. 1, your committee recommends that government prioritize providing locally sourced and locally provided meals for all school meal programs. Your committee recommends this and hopes to promote and preserve local school food programs that are already working well in these respects. 2, your committee recommends that government provide school meals in environmentally sustainable packaging. Your committee recognizes that sustainable packaging may vary according to the facilities and resources available within schools. 3, your committee recommends that the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning include healthy food consumption and preparation practices in school curriculum guidelines. Your committee recommends the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning be charged with creating the new curriculum, consulting with community partners and experts in this field. Your committee also notes that the department should provide professional development on the new curriculum. Your committee notes that the responsibility for this should not be placed squarely on the teacher and should involve the whole community. 4, your committee recommends that government inform stakeholders, unions, and employers in the school system prior to a public announcement on decisions that could adversely impact their collective agreement. Your committee met with the Canadian Union of Public Sector Employees of PEI on the reopening of schools during COVID-19 pandemic. The committee learned of the stress put on the union when operational changes due to COVID-19 pandemic were announced without time to prepare for the inevitable questions to be asked of them. 5, your committee recommends that government review the recommendations outlined in Charting the Way, final report of Education Governance Commission 2012, and consider their implementation. Your committee met with the PEI Home and School Federation, who highlighted this report. The report has 48 key recommendations that were compiled after extensive research in collaboration with stakeholders across PEI, which includes the recommendation that school districts be governed by elected board trustees. Your committee urges government to consider implementing these recommendations. 6, your committee recommends that the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning collaborate with staff, students, and other stakeholders to ensure that staff and students are able to effectively social distance within the school system. Your committee recommends this to ensure the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning provide the resources to satisfy the CPHO guidelines. Your committee met with representatives from the Canadian Union of Public Employees, PEI, on October 13th, 2020. Concern was expressed regarding the inability to social distance within the school system. Social distancing is a recommendation from the Chief Public Health Office to assist in preventing the spread of COVID-19. Your committee notes that large class sizes in most schools make social distancing difficult. Impossible, I would say. 7, your committee recommends, that government re-implement elected school boards in the public schools branch. Your committee received a presentation from Elections PEI representatives outlining the different costed ways government could re-implement elected school boards in the public schools branch. Your committee recommends government consider working alongside Elections PEI to determine the most suitable option. 8, your committee recommends governments revise standardized educational assessments to meet children's current needs developmentally or otherwise. Your committee recognizes standardized educational assessments may have to be delivered differently or not at all due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and that they should be revised as such. Conclusion, your committee thanks the individuals and organizations that briefed the committee in recent months. Your committee looks forward to consideration by government on the outlined recommendations and continuing its work with a focus on economic recovery in the new year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone willing to talk to the Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to rise, and I would like to thank the committee and the chair for tabling this report. Of course, when you go through the recommendations, these are indeed many of the things that the department is striving to do, and thank you for highlighting them and making sure that they are clearly articulated. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I'll go through and speak to each one of them right now, but Mr. Speaker, I may. That sounds like people want to hear. Mr. Premier, I think would probably love to hear that. But no, but what I'd like to do, though, Mr. Speaker, on a very serious note, I mean, one thing that is highlighted in the report is it was talked about the stress that is placed on teachers. And the stress on teachers, Mr. Speaker, is a real thing. And Mr. Speaker, now that we're seeing community spread in neighboring provinces, it's something that weighs heavy on teachers. And Mr. Speaker, I've talked a lot about the passion of teachers, the resilience of teachers, and how much they care and how much they put into their work. When we saw the pandemic, the shutdown early in the pandemic, teachers were stressed because they didn't have contact with their students and they were so worried about them. And Mr. Speaker, I really believe that in many ways that's at the root, I think at least, of what's stressing teachers is they want to help their students. They want to protect their students. They want to make sure they're safe. They don't want to be the one responsible for an outbreak. They don't want to be responsible for seeing that children are sick. Mr. Speaker, they want to do everything possible in their power to make sure their students can learn and stay safe. And Mr. Speaker, that means a tremendous amount of energy is spent being vigilant and making sure that they do everything according to the protocols that have been given, Mr. Speaker. And when they can't and when they have to take actions where they know they're not doing everything possible within their power, that's, I believe, the root of their stress, Mr. Speaker. So I want to commend the teachers, and I want to tell them that in cases where they can't do everything to their ability and they can't do things the way they want to, the way that they know they can protect the students, I want to apologize to them for that. Mr. Speaker, I think the Leader of the Opposition had said it's one of the challenges in government when you're trying to make tough decisions. You have an infinity of things to do with a finite amount of money. And Mr. Speaker, the member across the critic has talked about distancing and physically distancing, and how I think she just said in many cases it's impossible given the sizes of our classroom. And Mr. Speaker, there's nothing more that I would love to do is to double the amount of space we have in our classrooms so that we can physically distance. And Mr. Speaker, that's where we get back to this problem. And again, the Leader of the Opposition mentioned the magic money faucet. I wish there was a magic money faucet so we could say, turn that on and we're going to spend money hand over fist so we can do that, and it's just not feasible. Mr. Speaker, we work closely with the CPHO to make sure that we we do stay as safe as possible, and that's what's going on. And I commend the teachers because of their vigilance, because of their passion and their resilience. They're making our schools safe, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to work with the teachers. We're going to continue to work with both CUPE that looks after all the staff, including bus drivers and cleaners. And we're going to continue to work with the PEITF, Mr. Speaker. So as much as the members would like me to go through and speak to each one of these points and the recommendations right now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to leave that aside. I think that you'll see that these recommendations will be addressed, and our actions will speak larger than words anyways, Mr. Speaker. But I really wanted to say that piece on the teachers and thank them for all the great work they do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had a number of committee reports tabled in the House, and there's still a number to come, some very important ones. The three special committees that were created by this House on poverty, on climate change, and on records management all have really important reports to table in this House. And I thought this might be a good moment to stand up and praise the government for their vision, their willingness, their ability to come forward and actually change the structure of the committees that work here in this House. Before I became involved in politics, and I used to speak to people who were elected representatives, whether that be here in this House or in Ottawa or some other houses across the country, they always said, don't worry about what happens in question period, that's just theatre, that's all nonsense. It's what happens in committee is where the work gets done. But as the years went on, I heard back from those same people to say that the work in committees was getting as corrupted as the work here in the legislature during, for example, question period. And I saw that myself. I saw that after I was first elected in the committees that we had here in this province. I see a huge change. I see an enormous change. That may not be immediately apparent to islanders who don't, of course, pay generally much attention to what goes on committees, and I can't blame them for that. But the results of that are not insignificant. And I think the reports that we're getting back here, and today we're talking about education, the reports that we're getting back are demonstrating that the work of those committees is about to make a substantial difference, not just to what we do here, but to the lives of islanders. This is the first round of committee reports since we restructured the committees, and it's too early for that to become perhaps immediately apparent to islanders, but I think that's going to happen, and I really look forward to the reports from the other committees who will demonstrate what incredibly innovative, hard, good work is being done in all of the committees here that we have in this province. Regarding teachers, I appreciate the comments of the Minister. I appreciate, firstly, the report from my honourable colleague. Teaching is a hard profession. I come from a family of teachers. My mum and dad were both teachers. I have 4 sisters. 3 of them are teachers. And I'm aware of how difficult that job is. And I'm aware of how difficult it is for government to support teachers and give them the latitude and the freedom for them to be as creative in the classroom as they can be, because it's the innovative, creative teachers, at least from my experience, that we remember, and the ones who are able to change lives. And it's always a very delicate balancing act to create a system that provides consistent education for island children across this whole province, but also allows enough freedom for those teachers to express their individuality and to bring their natural, unique gifts to a classroom. And that's not an easy thing to do. And when we centralize decision making, to a certain extent, that gets squashed. So I understand how difficult this is. I look to other countries where the teaching profession is truly considered as a profession, and the standing of teachers in the community in such places as Finland is reflected in not only in how they are paid, but also the stature that they have in their society. And I realize that's not something we can change quickly, but the recommendations from this report and just the ongoing discussion about the importance of education, the importance to human lives, to young islanders who are who are now embarking on the excitement and the challenge and the joy and the pain of life. And the tools that we give them in school are the ones that they will be able to use in order to become the best citizens they can be. So it's an enormously important job, and I'm glad to see that the recommendations coming out here are so much in support of the teachers. And let's not forget, when we talk about the teaching profession, the teaching assistants, the educational assistants, the early childhood educators, who to a large extent are not, they're certainly not remunerated in a way that I'm sure the Minister feels is appropriate either. We would all love to pay these people who do, in some respects, the most critical work in our society, that pay would reflect the importance of their jobs. I said, I think in my opening question today, I quoted Joe Biden, the president-elect in the US, who said, it's not enough to praise our essential workers, and clearly teachers, ECEs, EAs, and TAs are all essential workers. Indeed, are the janitorial staff and the bus drivers and everybody else associated with the education system. It's not enough to praise them. We also have to protect and pay them. And, you know, we saw through the COVID pandemic how in some parts of the private sector in particular, those essential workers were given bonuses, they were given raises, there was some sort of recognition of thanks from their employees, from their employers, excuse me, for the importance of the work they were doing and the essential nature of their presence in the workplace. And sadly, that was stripped away from many of them when the sort of, I guess what happened was the willingness of those employers to continue paying them a living wage just evaporated. And that's a real sad thing. Of course, that doesn't happen in the public sector. But it's important that we, again, not only praise our essential workers, but that we pay them and that we protect them. I think we've done extraordinarily well through this pandemic, and I want to point particularly to the education system. I know there were some people who thought we opened too early, that the plan that was in place to go back was not going to work. And it was a difficult time. It was a perilous time. And I think that we did far, far better than many other jurisdictions. I look at the way the system has managed to continue to function. Children are in school, they are learning, the transportation system is working. And when I look to other jurisdictions where there is an ongoing struggle of schools having to close down, and please God, don't let that happen here on Prince Edward Island. But we have done extraordinarily well, and I think it's important that we recognize that and acknowledge it here in this House. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to stand and give some thoughts on this report. I know I sort of generalized in terms of committees, but I haven't spoken to any of the committee reports yet, and I thought it was important to have it on the record that this report is indicative of all of the other committee reports that have been tabled and are yet to be tabled, and that it's a real sea change, in my opinion, in the quality of governance and politics here on Prince Edward Island. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone else that speak to the report? Charlotte Carey. Introduction of government bills. Government motions. The honourable member from Cornwall, Meadowbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with unanimous consent of the House, I'd like to read motion number 20 and 124.
Honourable members, does he have consent of the House? Honourable member, can you give a brief statement?
Yeah. Just third reading.
Third reading on the bills from last night.
Oh, sorry.
Third readings.
We're going to get through these two, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, does he have a unanimous consent?
Yes.
Honourable member, you have unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by O'Leary and Verness, that Bill number 120, order of the day, be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Order number 19, an act to amend the Animal Health Act, Bill number 120, ordered for third reading.
Honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by O'Leary and Verness that the said bill be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 120, an act to amend the Animal Health Act, read a third time.
Honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by O'Leary and Verness that the said bill do now pass.
Shall it carry? Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to, with amendment, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do not pass. All those in favour, say yea. Yea. Contrary? Nay. Honourable member, your bill is passed. The honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by O'Leary and Verness, that bill number 124, order of the day, be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Order number 20, an act to amend the Animal Welfare Act, Bill number 124, ordered for third reading.
Honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by O'Leary and Verness that the said bill be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 124, an act to amend the Animal Welfare Act, read a third time.
Honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by O'Leary and Verness that the said bill do not pass.
Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the Committee of the whole House, reported, agreed to, with amendment, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do not pass. All those in favour say yea. Yea. Contrary, nay. Honourable member, bill is passed. Unanimous. The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that the second order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 2, consideration of the capital estimates in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Honourable Premier, that this House now resolve itself in the Committee of the whole House to take into consideration capital supply to Her Majesty.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House to consider the granted supply to Her Majesty. Request to bring a stranger onto the floor has been requested. Shall it be approved? Good afternoon. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard?
Gordon McFadgen, Assistant Secretary of Treasury Board.
Thank you very much. Honourable members, we left off on page 9 capital expenditure, education and lifelong learning. I had read the section capital improvements schools, and it is under debate. Charlotte Brighton.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, we are really thrilled about the net zero promises. I was wondering, are there any capital expenditures here associated with the promised net zero schools?
Yes, Honourable Member, there was an increase in the budget of each of the capital project bills that are coming forward to take into consideration net zero ready spend.
Charlotte Brighton.
So one of the key elements about net zero is that it, in the long run, doesn't cost any more. How are you planning to account for that? Not so much these two schools, but if you're going to do all buildings in the next 10 years, what's your vision for financing that?
We have said that if we're going to be net zero moving forward, we will have to definitely consider the capital expenditures that we have and the number of bills that we do. But I think you're referring to as we move forward, there will be less, hopefully, cost in the operating budget because these schools will not take as much heat or as much maybe capital expenditure as they would if they weren't net zero.
Charlotte Brighton.
So it was suggested that you look at financing net zero features outside the budget, like, for instance, through the Energy Corporation. Have you or will you be considering that?
It's not something that I'm aware of or familiar with, but the departments continue to work together to ensure that we do everything through that net zero lens.
Charlotte Brighton.
Well, you must be aware, for instance, that when you build $30 million windmills, they don't show up in your budget. So,
that's true. It's through the Energy Corp.
Yeah.
Charlotte Brighton.
So it is possible. Okay, thank you for now.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. And Chair, I'd just like to take one moment just to recognize the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture for, after the questions yesterday, for bringing back all the information that he did from the questions before yesterday. I think it's really important, and I'd like to recognize it because when we're talking about, the millions of dollars that we're talking about, we have a small book with one liner in it, so it's really hard when you're going through it to actually know what that $4 million is or what the breakdown of it is. And as part of that, I'd like to also recognize government that in the operation budget, we get a list of handouts. And that list of handouts identifies where all the money is going. Mm-hmm. And it makes it so much easier for us to go through it and ask questions because we have the information in front of us. Whereas with the capital budget, and I recognized this the last time, without handouts or a list of where the money is going, it's really hard to represent Islanders of what their asks are and what their concerns are and what is the priorities. So when the minister yesterday tabled the numbers from his department, it's a computer printout. And I would just love it if that kind of information was available to us as we go through this, as a note for the next year, because I think it's really valuable. And it would also make this process a lot easier because then you're not trying to jot down and trying to figure out if what you were looking for is actually on the list. So thank you, Chair, for letting me just kind of divert a little bit on that and just recognize the good work of government from those two aspects. So thank you. So the other point that I'd just like to take an opportunity to make is the difference between the capital budget and the operating budget. So I recognize that the operating budget, government has about 5%, 10%, thereabouts a flex, because the rest of the budget is dedicated to salaries, programs, and that kind of thing. Whereas the capital budget, that's truly where a government gets to put their fingerprint on what their priorities are going forward. And so we really have an opportunity to see what the priorities are. And I think it's important for Islanders to also know that difference, because we are pretty solid on the operating budget and there's not a lot of flex room there. Capital's a little bit different. So I did want to dig in a little bit, Minister, about the spending on the high school for Stratford. And recognizing that planning on infrastructure should start well before we're ever ready to actually move forward. That would be future planning. It's part of your strategic plan. When you set your strategic plan, then that's when you actually start moving forward. So recognizing, yes, I would agree with you that the land is still being negotiated, which is just about done, and took longer than anybody ever thought. The need for students is still there and is still going to be there because we're already over capacity at this point in time. So, Minister, could you tell me when the capital spend for the Stratford High School is and what the completion date is based on this budget?
Well, I can say that there is money going out into 2025 for the Stratford high school, so that would be, the completion would be 2025, 2026. Yeah. Gordon, go ahead.
Based on the information provided by the department on the current plan, I think they're anticipating the fall of 2025 for students to be going to school.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the fall of 2025, we're looking at having students in that school, attending that school. Do you have a probability, the likelihood of that happening? Is that set? Is that pretty concrete?
We would assume. I mean, we didn't expect to be where we're at a year ago when we were making our capital plans because of COVID and the delays that caused. And so, you know, the capital plan is a plan for sure. And Honourable Member, when you made that clarification for the public and for everyone in general about the operating budget versus capital budget, the one comment I would like to make is any spending done in the capital budget goes directly to our long-term debt. So we have to, it's not a free-for-all, and it's not we can do whatever we want to do. We could within reason as long as we have the ability to repay it, but it is going to the long-term debt of Islanders.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you for that, Minister, and I couldn't agree more. There's no such thing as free money. Even if it's only 80-20 money, it's still not free money. And when we look at what we're going to spend our capital on, it really, measuring outcomes of what we're trying to accomplish is very important. And so when you measure the outcomes of a school, or when you measure the outcomes of, you know, mental health, and all of that needs to be taken into consideration absolutely as to when that money gets spent. So just Gordon, I was reviewing some transcripts back when we had talked about this last year, and I believe that you had, when I asked how long it takes to build a school, I think you had said approximately 2.5 years. Does that sound right to you?
That's an accountant's version of how to build a school, for sure. Stratford is like any brand new school build, is problematic in that until you kind of secure the site, it's hard to get into the actual design detail as to what the school, how the shape will be, and you know what, you know, I think we know practically what goes in it. There's a school design manual. We have the new net zero sort of considerations and as to how the infrastructure and some of the school supports will be. But in an ideal world, it's you know, it's pretty consistent. 2 heavy building years with a design year and perhaps some, you know, trailing expenses when you kind of commission the building.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I do appreciate that. So can you tell me in this current budget when the money is starting for the Stratford High School? In what year, sorry?
It starts 2021 with some initial planning and design money, so there'll be a number, we'll have an RFP for an architect to kind of design the school, and they'll take a number of months, if not many months actually, to come up with design and design iterations. Then we'll have to go to a tender for that particular design once all the players that are involved in the planning committee are happy with design, and then, you know, shovels will go in the ground. So.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, I
And money
appreciate
for land,
that.
yes, yeah.
So I know we talk about you need the land first, but when you're designing, I think in 2018, the Public Schools Branch put forward a resolution that they support the fact that we need to have a new high school. And it was announced in the 2018 for the 2019-2020 budget. At what point, though, do we recognize that the land's obviously going to come? Like, what impacts are there, and what planning parts can you start, knowing that there is already basically a manual of what's supposed to go into a school, if we already have that defined?
That's a good question. When I look back in some of the school projects that I've been involved with, each one of the planning committees, which is made up of the parents of the home and school, likes to kind of put a stamp or a flavor. So although the basic classroom size generally is the same size and what goes in a classroom, and there's you know, a gymnasium and things like that, how the school looks and feels sometimes, and a lot of time, is we try to accommodate the school planning committee, because the building is going to fit within the community, you know, for the next number of years, and they have to be happy with it.
Sure. Intervention from the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to add that the planning committee is crucial, right? And that's where it brings all of the different partners together, including the community. And I'm really pleased to announce today that Dylan Mullally, who is the former principal of Charlottetown Rural and a member of the Stratford community, as well as Jill Burridge, who is a Stratford councillor, have agreed to co-chair the planning committee. So I think we're off to a very good start, and of course that's going to be key to driving this process forward.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you. And I would agree that there is obviously community input. I mean, the Minister of Health and Wellness and I both sat in 3 public meetings in which the town of the community of Stratford participated heavily in planning and what they wanted to see. And there was a lot of really great groundwork, and I'd like to recognize the town of Stratford for doing that kind of preliminary work, because that's important, right, to identify what's important in the community. And I feel like the community has absolutely opened their arms to the wanting to have a high school in the district and needing it sooner than later. But as I brought up earlier, and I don't have the numbers, and perhaps possibly we could get an intervention on this as well, the numbers that were tabled for the projections of student enrollment were only up to 24-25. They were tabled November 5th of this year. I'll just point out I asked for them November 29th of last year. But anyway, it was a written answer that was submitted. So it only went up to 24-25, in which we're going to be about 400 students over capacity. I'm wondering if there might be an intervention to let me know what the numbers would be for 25-26, considering that we're not going to be opening the high school until fall of 2026.
Pardon? Okay, intervention from the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
So the current Charlottetown High School enrollment is 1,922 students, and the current capacity in the Charlottetown High Schools, that's the rural and the gray, is 1,900. And going out to forward, the enrollment projections indicate that the Charlottetown High School enrollments will be 2,405 in 5 years, that's a 25-26, and 2,295 in 10 years, that's the 2030 to 31. Those are the numbers I have right in front of me here for you. And I, of course, the co-chairs of the planning committee have those numbers as well.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Just so I can clarify that, did the minister say 2,405 enrollments? Was it 2,405 was the number that you had just given?
Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, could you please clarify that?
What was the question? It's 2,405.
Just to clarify, yeah.
26.
Okay, Thank you. Mermaid Stratford.
So essentially, by the time the school opens, we're going to be looking at being over capacity by 600 students.
Mermaid Stratford.
And so I would ask then to either, like, where are those 600 kids going? And I recognize that he said earlier that it could be mobile units or what have you, but we also have to talk about value for money. And when we build, putting in interim Band-Aid solutions instead of, you know, finding a way to put in the permanent solution, that's just costing taxpayers a whole lot of extra money in order to put in those mobile units.
Intervention from the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
So we're going to build the new Stratford High School as fast as we possibly can. Don't forget, these are enrollment projections. This is an art as opposed to a science. Every year we get new projections, and often we see them, they change. And so we're going to deal with that as best as we can. I would love to say that the new Stratford High School was opening next year, but the reality of the situation is we are where we're at, and this is as fast as we can go.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, I'll leave that for now, Chair. Thank you, and I appreciate the
You're welcome.
answers. Thank you.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering what projects are included in the $7,399,000 for this year's spending.
Each year, both school boards are asked to put forward a list of projects that they would like to see done in the upcoming school year, with the basis known that emergency repairs are required to be done as they are done. Some of the things that have been put forward for the list, well, I should say that I'm not sure that that list has been prepared for the upcoming year. Some of the things that have been done in the current year, I have a list of that if that's of any interest to the member.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Sorry, Gord, I'm having a bit of trouble hearing. I don't know where our earbuds went. Did you say that you've got a list for this year but not next year?
That's correct. They would be working on the list right now for the priority items for next summer. I do have a list of what was invested in that particular area for this year.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Okay. And so we've already talked about the ones that are starting this year, but we're not sure what.
Oh, you mean, okay, I'm sorry. So I misread the question here a little bit. For the 7399 in the school capital construction, just make sure I got my information all lined up here. We have Elliott River planned in that 7399 to get up and running. Montague Consolidated, so 2.8 for Elliott River, 2.5 for Montague Consolidated. West Royalty is forecast to get going there. A little bit of money for the Sherwood School. And the final piece of the puzzle, I guess, for Cole-sur-Mer.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Spending is projected to increase roughly 2.5 times this year. And I'm wondering what projects are beginning in I guess you may not have this with you since you didn't have the last ones, but the 21-22 fiscal year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, those schools would be the ones that were projected to get going in 21-22. So that was, when I was reading the total, they were greater than 7399. So the 7399 are what's underway for the current fiscal year.
Okay.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair.
So,
so then, this may be, you may not be able to answer this one, which the projects that will be continuing from the 2021 into the 21-22 fiscal year.
right. Really and truly, the only one that's of any great significance that continues from 2020-21 into 21-22 would be a Cole-sur-Mer. It was the one school under construction during the current year that will be kind of winding up in 21-22. All the other previously mentioned schools will be commencing in 21-22.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. We kind of touched on this a little bit early, but do you predict that COVID will delay any of these projects?
Well, I don't have the crystal ball, but we're hoping not. It's yet to be determined. Most constructions seem to, buzz along fairly well, during the first round of COVID. And, now that we have protocols in place and companies know how to deal with it, I'm hoping and assuming that we'll move forward, on a fairly regular basis.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I know there were concerns raised as we were kind of starting up at the school year with the school ventilation systems, and I had requested school ventilation reports and was told that there are no reports, that they are done on an as-needed basis, which unless I wasn't given all of the information, I would think that would have been an important time to do, to look at, to test our ventilation systems and whether they're adequate for the purposes of COVID. I'm wondering if there are any upgrades planned to those systems.
I'm not quite sure what the upgrades are, but I will definitely bring that back.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
I think I'm good for that section, Chair.
Okay, Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to ask a few questions about the work being done at Ecole Sur-Mer. So I know you've noted that is a part of this capital improvement spend, and I think it's that's a school that's in my district, and I know that it's quite a remarkable bit of work that's going on there. It's really going to expand the possibilities for that school, and I wanted to just ask, it's a big project. Have the plans changed at all since the initial, the beginning of that project to now?
That's really not any information we would have as far as plans. We're here to talk about dollars, so. And all I have here is that it is, they're completing the work in this current budget.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So when you spend the dollars, is there any interest or follow-up to make sure that they're being spent in the way that were initially planned to be spent?
Well, there's an RFP issued. There's a school plan, design work. All of that, has to be adhered to, and companies are expected to do the work that they have planned to do and are getting paid to do.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay, thank you, Chair. No, it's I asked the question just because we are aware, and it's been stated in this House, that construction is becoming more expensive, and that project has been going on for a very long time. So, there were a lot of plans. I believe in the initial, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was expanding the, well, perhaps not anybody, perhaps intervention, I don't know. But they were expanding into a new area for a high school, as well as getting a new gym, because that needed some very serious work, and perhaps a few other things as well. So I just wanted to make sure that the original plan was still being followed through, since it's been an ongoing project. I believe it's a multi-year commitment to make that happen, and with construction costs going up, I just wanted to follow up to make sure that things were all moving along as expected.
You're right to say that this has been a multi-year project. The information that I have here indicates that as far back as 2016, the grade 10 expansion went on at Ecole Sur-Mer, followed with a grade 11 expansion and then a grade 12 expansion. A high school gym was required now that it is a high school, and some sports fields upgrades were also added. What I will say is that for all our school construction projects, there is a fairly active planning group, which usually there's a chair, as the minister had indicated, is selected to lead along the project, and there is representation from the school board, from the department, from transportation, infrastructure and energy, and from the community groups and parent groups. So it's that planning group that is kind of not signing off, but aware of the details that are going into the particular construction, and they continue to meet continuously throughout the construction project to make sure that things get done and done the way that they had all agreed to up front.
Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So just so I am clear on who is part of that planning group, did you say administration and/or teachers at the school as well are part of that planning group?
Often they would have a teacher representative from the school. We can bring back the specific composition of all, but generally they try to get a broad representation of the users of the group, of the users of the facility, I should say.
Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I would appreciate that information being brought back, again, because it is a multi-year project and we do know that the cost of construction has gone up. I think having the voice of teachers and the administration at the school, as well as parents, is a critical part of this to make sure that if things do need to be changed, if there's going to be any reduction in what the original plan looked like because of the cost, their voices need to be heard into what that's going to look like. So I'd be honest, I'd be surprised if there haven't been any changes since it is a multi-year project. That would be great news, but most importantly, I'd want to know what those are and to make sure those voices are part of that discussion. So if you could bring that information back, it would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
That's all, Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I want to get back to one of the comments I saw is that design projects that have been completed but not built won't be net zero, and I just want to raise my concern about that. And I know you are not a net zero specialist, you're into finances, so I'll put it in a financial term like the windows we have here, which would still meet current building code, but even though they were put in 40 years ago, double glazed windows. If you're at the design stage, change the glazing from double to triple glazing roughly. It will roughly make the windows twice as good. Will cost like $5 to $10 a square foot. If you wait until after the building is built, you have to tear the whole window out and put a new one in. It will cost like $100 to $200 per square foot, vastly more. So, particularly given the incredibly fast implementation to get to net zero in only 10 years, you might reconsider that decision. Just a comment I'm leaving with you.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Both net zero features as well as electric school buses have higher upfront costs, of course, which are offset by yearly savings in energy and fuel costs. So I'm wondering how this is handled budget-wise.
The savings would be it would be part of the operating budget, because that's in the operation of upkeep and operation of school buses and just the daily needs of the school.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Has the government looked into off-budget financing such as through the Energy Corporation?
That question was asked earlier, and I can't really comment on that. I mean, the Energy Corp is a separate entity from Crown Corporation, separate from government, but continue to work together with government. And, this net zero announcement is something fairly new, but it's something that each department is viewing through their own lens and all the decisions they're making. So the Energy Corp, I'm sure, will be part of that. I can't really speak to in what way.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification. So we are on the line school construction and renovations right now, or can we speak to capital repairs now?
You speak to both.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can give us a list. You don't have to name them all right now, but if you give the list of all the capital repairs that will be covered in this budget.
Including the regular repairs that happen. I think there's $6 million allocated for ongoing. Sorry, $4 million for ongoing, what would happen on a regular basis, but there's also the major renovations and improvements to schools, so.
Yeah.
A list of. Okay.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So in the 5-year plan, capital repairs is projected to be cut in half in next year's budget and to remain at that level for the future. Why is that?
Last year, for the first time, we introduced an additional $2 million in capital repair funding for the schools that was well received. And the thought process at the time was that that extra $2 million would get some of the next level projects, the sort of the bigger ticket items that may or may not have gotten done with a $2 million budget. And we got a number of bigger projects completed. School boards had requested that stay in place for another year to try to finish off the list, and the hope is to get back to a more regular, routine, smaller dollar capital project listing in the out years.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm good for now.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
You mentioned Elliott River there. Could you give me the breakdown on the numbers in Elliott River from last year to this year?
You're really testing there. The last year in the 2019 budget, there was $5.5 million allocated to Elliott River, and I think that number is now up to 7.6 million.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
And do you have a breakdown of the spend on that as far as whether it's maintenance or new builds or an extension onto the school?
Currently, that project as well is in the early planning stages, but some of the things that they have identified as liking to get done, I guess, there was an addition going on that particular school, about 7,000 square feet planned. HVAC, ventilation system upgrades, heating system upgrades, electrical improvements, renovations to staff rooms, lobby areas, and school administration area, washrooms, and I believe they were looking at an elevator there if they could get it in.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
And do you have any idea when the start time is that?
They're hoping to get a chunk of that going this year, so there is 2.8 million scheduled for this year. As you recall, anytime that we're on a school site that's an active school site, we're kind of restricted to when we can go in and do some major construction. So I think they're planning over 3 summers to get the work phased in and completed.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
So last year on the Coles Associates report, which you've identified most of the issues that came up, the administration and the Home and School Federation, with the numbers that are in that school and the age of the school, the multipurpose room was what you mentioned, was a priority to them. And the chairlift for persons with disabilities and the washrooms identified for persons with disabilities as well. So I guess, as I sit here, are we going to satisfy their request to make the multipurpose room a priority as opposed to the Coles Associates report, which was done a year ago, which really obviously wasn't too much of a priority because nothing was done on it. So I guess I'm just asking on behalf of the Home and School and the administration if their appropriation of what their desire is to have that multipurpose room and the lift, the elevator, and the washrooms done first.
I believe the money that was allocated last year was to address the serious building deficiencies that were identified by Coles. And with the additional money added this year, it was going to address most of the things that were brought up by initial parent and community meetings.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
Yeah, no, I fully understand that. I guess what I'm trying to say is point blank that hopefully the addition is done ASAP, along with the maintenance or whatever has to be done in priority of the safety of the school and the students. But the request, and I know the minister knows this because we sat at the same table at a meeting, and their priority was a multi-purpose room, washrooms, elevator, the list goes on, but the priority was the room due to the size of the school and the number of the students and what they were being faced with. So anyway, that's fine, Chair, thank you.
You're welcome. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Bus replacement appropriations provided for the purchase of new buses. School buses, $4,550,000. Total bus replacement, $4,550,000. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. The 5-year expenditures for buses are expected to rise from 4.55 million to a peak of 10 million in 24-25, and then come down some. Is this purely related to the new electric buses?
The rise and the change in the years is a reflection on when buses are coming out of service, and when those buses are coming out of service, the plan now is to replace them with electric buses.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So it is purely related to the increased cost from, we're going to have more buses retiring some years, and those are all going to be electric, and that's our fluctuation we're seeing here?
That is the plan, yes.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. How is the province going to procure these electric buses?
Well, it will go to tender.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Would that be a single RFP, multiple RFPs, sole source purchase?
I think it would be a multiple RFPs, depending on when they're needed. Gord can correct me if I'm wrong, but, the plan is to phase them in over a number of years.
Generally, the process used by the school boards is there's an identification of the number that is needing to be replaced in a particular year, and go out for a single RFP each year for the replacement of the buses that are needed during the year.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So when are those RFPs issued? Is it the year that of the replacement, a year ahead, or 2 years ahead?
It's usually the year ahead, so that we get replacement of them for the year that they are required.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. What RFPs have been issued to date this year?
I'll have to bring that back.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard that quite a bit from the Minister in questioning previously. That you commit to bring that back before we approve this section?
We will bring it back when the department has it ready for us. I mean, we'd had this discussion about approving a section before. Before the capital budget is approved, we'd be more than happy to make sure we have it back if that's what you want.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. With which companies were these procurement agreements with?
For the electric school buses, it's with a company by the name of Lion.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So how many buses from, I guess just one company? I was going to say each company.
It's just one RFP, the first one. So I'm not sure what the number is for buses, but it's 12. Yeah, 12 buses, the first RFP.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. These buses were partially funded by the federal government. Which fund did you access for this?
I believe that's in the Invest in Canada Infrastructure Plan Fund.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Do we have an appropriate level of mechanics that can service an electric bus fleet on PEI?
I think that's one of the concerns, and the department's working on that right now to ensure that the mechanics that we have or that we need will be there when we get the buses.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fine, Chair.
Shall the section carry?
Question, Chair.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. So I was delighted, of course, to hear that we're going to be purchasing electric buses and presumably replace the whole fleet over time. There was a comment, and I can't remember which minister it was, but it was recently in the House, maybe even today, on the possibility of those buses also becoming part of a public transit system. I'm wondering if you have anything you can tell us on that, on the planning?
It was actually me, honorable member, and I know initially we did look at whether we could maybe multi-purpose the buses. I'm not sure that we can go down that path, but I would say through active transportation, and we are going to look at if there is going to be buses provided throughout the island, that they will be electric, net zero, and how do we, how does that look? We don't really know, I don't think, how that looks, but the department is working on that right now.
Leader of the Opposition.
Just to go back to something that my honourable colleague was talking about, the process for procurement here. Lion Buses is who we have we're purchasing this first order from. Were there any other manufacturers considered?
It was an open RFP, and I believe Lion was the only one that had participated in the most recent tender.
Leader of the Opposition.
And I'm sorry, was that for 12 buses? Is that, yeah, okay. And what was the complete capital cost of that?
I think they're around 350,000 a bus, so I think it's around 4 million.
4 million or something? Yeah, okay.
Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah, it surprises me that a contract of that size would not have attracted some competition. Are there other Canadian manufacturers who would have been able to meet the whatever the details of the procurement contract were?
I believe regularly in past procurements, we would have had up to 3 bidders for school buses. And I believe at least one of those other companies has indicated to the department that they are on track to have an electric vehicle available for the next time we tender.
Leader of the Opposition.
So in a situation like this where we have a very large procurement going out and we only have a single source person or company that comes back, is there any process to evaluate whether we're getting value for money from that company? I mean, if we have nothing to compare it with.
Yeah, they would have to meet the specification of the RFP, so a lot of research would have gone into what those specifications would be. So, you have to meet that criteria to be successful.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Last year, you mentioned that that you were replacing diesel buses with propane buses. And I'm just wondering if you can update us on that initiative.
Go ahead.
Now, I believe we were replacing diesel with gasoline-powered buses the last go-around. We hadn't really considered the propane option.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
And so, is that still the plan?
We did procure gasoline-powered buses last year and some for this year, along with the electric-powered, but the plan going forward, based on this capital budget, is to be electric on a go-forward basis.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
What's the average lifespan of a bus?
Based on the regulations for school buses, they're allowed in active service for 12 years with another 2 years in the spare fleet, so a total of 14 years.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So we know that passing stop school buses has been a huge issue on PEI, and I'm just wondering if any of these new buses are equipped with any sort of equipment to kind of to monitor that, to prevent and record.
The recent improvements to the school buses to help to be more visual, I guess, on the road was that we had added a second stop arm, so there's 2 stop arms on the school buses and a flashing strobe light on the roof. So as you're coming on to oncoming traffic, you get noticed a little more readily. The actual recording and camera technology, they're constantly looking at that to see whether or not that it will stand up in court at the end of the day, but I know that's an ongoing issue that they're constantly monitoring, but we don't have that capability right now.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
And I can appreciate that recording technology being an issue. I know it was an issue with, talked about in policing for a long time too. I'm just wondering if there's any current buses that have, so when you said the long arm, is that the arm that swings out when the bus stops so that it?
I was talking about a second stop arm, so that would be the stop sign that comes out from the bus. There's one on the front and one on the back now. The long arm that comes out from the front is actually for the children so they don't get in too tight to the bus when they're crossing across the front of the bus.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Okay, so do any of our current buses have that now?
They're all equipped with a sweeping arm in the front for the children, but it doesn't go into oncoming traffic. It's just the 2 stop arms that would go out.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So I just had something shared with me. It was the commitment from Premier Dennis King that said, in his address to the Atlantic Committee of the Canadian Propane Association in Morel on June 13th, Premier Dennis King said the PEI government...
Honourable Member, you can't use a person's name.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I apologize for that. The Premier said the PEI government is looking at adding propane-powered buses to the school fleet as early as the fall of 2020, so indeed that was
That was something I think that was looked at previous, but we realized through the goal to have net zero that we went the electric school bus way instead.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Okay, that's good, thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. What's going to happen with these buses at the end of life? Usually we just auction them off. Is the same thing going to be happening with these electric buses?
I would assume. We haven't gotten to that point yet, and we don't really want to look at end of life right now. We're looking at actually getting them, but any excess inventory through government is usually always auctioned off, yeah.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So as far as finances go and looking at the rate of return of the investment in the electric bus, the end of life, something you surely have factored in there. When I had a discussion with the Department of Education, they had mentioned that it was something like $500 to $1,500 that these things get salvaged for, essentially, sold off for. That's not part of the...
That would be the diesel buses at the end of their life.
That's
We're
right.
coming into a new kind of era, and what the batteries will be worth for these buses may change that calculation a little bit, but, you know, in the 14 years that we'll have those buses, you know, that'll definitely be a consideration at the end on what they're actually worth, and whether we can salvage any of the pieces before they come off the road based on regulation.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So have you had any communications with the utility themselves on any interest of procuring these batteries when they get to the 14-year?
I think it's a little premature to get into that. This is a new initiative for the province, and, you know, we will continue to make sure that whatever, I guess, inventory we have that has to be, you know, disposed of will be done in the most efficient way for government.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's premature at all. We've got some net zero targets at 2030 and 2040, and that falls right within that. So if you're going to be hitting those targets, you got to be thinking on those timelines, Minister. So I heard that there was only one response to this RFP, and I find that kind of odd because I went on a trip with the Minister to tour Lion Electric, and before we went, I asked the question of the Deputy if there was indeed other suppliers that, or if there was just this one supplier. And he said, indeed, there are other suppliers in North America. So did we not reach out to those other suppliers, or did we take tours of these other places?
All I can say, Honourable Member, is it was an open RFP, and the Lion was the only one that responded.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. That might have something to do with the fact that the Minister visited the facility and had a tour.
So, Honourable Member, I would hope that if we are going to make a major purchase like we're making, and a new initiative, that the Minister would do the investigation and the education that he would need to know what is involved in an electric bus. So it's not up to government to push other companies to enter into an RFP. It was an open call. It was open to all, and I would hope that if a company is being proactive, especially in a new industry like this, that they would be watching for any open RFP from any school. I can't see where government, if we start influencing who actually puts forward an offer to an RFP, then you're getting into a whole other kettle of fish, I would say.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. And I agree with that statement exactly. And if there's only one manufacturer that gets a visit from the Minister, and there's other manufacturers known to the Minister, I would say that might be a factor that comes into play. Would Lion have known without a visit from our government about this tender?
I'm not quite sure what the Minister is getting at, but this was an open RFP, and there would have been, if there would have been other people as responded to the RFP, it would have been a more competitive process.
You called them, you were there too.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Would the Minister like to intervene and offer his opinion?
Honourable Member, we're talking about the actual expenditures for the capital budget. We know what the amount is for electric school buses for this coming year and for the plan moving forward for the next 5 years.
Chair, I'll intervene.
I have an intervention from the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy.
We reached out to all of the companies who had electric buses in the system, and a lot of them weren't ready to bid.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Not ready to bid. Would the minister care to provide any details on what had them not ready to bid? I've read stories of many electric buses being delivered to other jurisdictions from other companies.
Member from the Summerside South Drive, you have to address your questions through the chair, please.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Okay.
So I'll just ask that again. I know of other jurisdictions where electric bus manufacturers have delivered to them, and I'm wondering why they would not be interested in bidding on this. What part of the tender would they not have been interested in?
That's really not for us to comment on. I mean, it's up to companies to respond to an open RFP, and the one that responded was Lion.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. Do you think it would be possible for us to see that the communication that indicated these other companies were not interested in offering a bid to this tender?
It's not part of what we're here to talk about today. And the Honourable Minister told you that there was communication. There are a number of companies, I think one of them in particular, who said that they'd be interested in bidding on the next round, but they are not ready yet to bid on the first round of electric school buses for the province.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. So that's one of the things I would like to see returned as far as what you bring back. If you could table that information here, that'd be great.
I'm sure the department will look into that.
Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Chair. That's fine for now.
O'Leary Inverness.
Minister, just to follow up a little bit on the school buses, there's a company up, I think in Western PEI, frequent sometimes a place I have lunch in O'Leary, but they have developed some sort of a device. I think they were working towards a patent on it, and to kind of be a safety protection for school buses when they're stopped, to allow children to cross the road. Have you had any contact with them? Their comment to me, I guess, was they got very little interest and support from government on this, so I'm just kind of curious to why that would be, or maybe you can shed some light on the issue.
I really can't. It's not part of what we're here prepared to talk about. I would suggest that they reach out to the department again, and if there's a problem, you could reach out to the minister.
Thank you.
O'Leary Inverness.
No, that's fine.
Shall the section carry? Total capital expenditure, education lifelong learning, $28,275,600. Shall it carry?
Carry.
Page 11, capital expenditure, environment, water, and climate change. 2021-2022 budget estimate, equipment appropriations provided for equipment purchases. Laboratory equipment, $300,000. Field equipment, $130,000. Forest fire vehicles, $100,000. Corporate land use inventory, $1,226,000. Total equipment, $1,756,000. Shall the section carry? Summerside, Wilmot.
Chair. There's a projected jump in the line for laboratory equipment in 22-23 fiscal year. Can you just tell me what that's for?
When we request information from the department, they look through their various pieces of equipment to try to see what is going to be required to be updated over the 5-year window for the capital budget. So in that particular year, they are looking to upgrade their, bear with me, Fournier Transform Infrared Spectrograph system for $550,000. So they, that particular piece of gear, that's the value of it, and that's when it needs to be updated. So that's when they have it in the 5-year window.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give me a sense of what that's used for?
No, I cannot.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. That's fair. Maybe the minister could offer an intervention on that.
We can get the department to bring that back.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. That would be fine. For forest fire vehicles, I noticed the line drops to 0 in 23-24. Can you give me a sense of why that is?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a fairly comprehensive review of some fairly aging equipment that we are at the end of replacing that equipment. So generally a forest fire fighting vehicle has a lifespan of about 20 years. We had a fairly intensive program over the last 3 to 4 years to get all of that gear up and running and replaced, so we're done with that replacement program.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be normal to go several years without purchasing any new forest fire vehicles?
I think that it was.
Yeah.
It had, you know, there obviously had been a lag there in purchase, so that there was some catch-up to be done.
The numbers aren't great, so there's not like there's 20 vehicles, one to replace every year. There's a fleet, a small fleet, because they do rely a lot on the volunteer fire departments across PEI, and this group is specially trained in forest firefighting, and so in combination with the local fire departments, this team of experts with this equipment would be going in on the wooded areas and specialized equipment for those areas.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a little bit difficult to hear you, but I believe you had said that you've been in consultation with various various fire stations to get a sense of what their equipment needs would be, and that this is, okay.
I'm sorry, I'll speak a little bit louder. This group works with all of the volunteer firefighters across PEI, so this is one resource with the other 36 departments that are in PEI that would be responding to fire scenes. So this group has some dedicated forest firefighting equipment where most volunteer departments have structural firefighting equipment, but have manpower and personnel, and they work together, is what I was trying to say.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. I understand. Thank you for that clarification. I do apologize. I know it's hard to hear when you're not facing someone. It's very awkward. On the corporate land use registry, I was just wondering if you could tell me a bit about that. How will it be used?
Based on the information provided to me, it's PEI Forest Management Act requires a province-wide forest inventory and state of forest report every 10 years. So with this particular report, they just kind of look at where we're at today and any of the things that need to be addressed in the future.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, okay. I'm familiar with the State of the Forest report, and I know it's due out in 2020, actually, this year. So the corporate land use inventory is the process to update the State of the Forest report. Is that an accurate reflection?
Correct.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, that's more clear. Can you give me a sense of when that report would be out? Because it looks like money continues to be available for that land use inventory beyond this year.
That was a 2-year project that was in 2021 and 21-22. So there's no money in any out years past the next fiscal year. So I take that the work will be concluded within the next fiscal year in time to put the report out.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. So perhaps I'm misunderstanding this, and I'm prepared to acknowledge I might be, but I was of the impression the State of the Forest report had to be done for this year, so I was surprised to see the funding for the work to create that report 2 years from now. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, and again, we're talking this fiscal year starts in April, so like 4 months from now.
Yeah.
So there'll be some work, so it not necessarily goes all the way into the March of 2022. So I suspect the work is underway and will be done in time to respond to the needs of that report.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I understand that. I was also wondering on this topic if any thought was given into investing capital into protecting land. Protected land as capital investment, natural capital. Other jurisdictions do consider natural capital.
Generally, any land ownership is through the Department of Transportation, Infrastructure and Energy under consultation with the Department of Environment as a resource body. And I believe there is some funds later on in that section for purchasing of land.
Somerset Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. Is the purchasing of land that's coming up in another section with the intention of increasing our province's protected land, for example?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Fantastic. So would it be better if I ask questions about that at that section?
Yeah, it's not under environment, water, and climate change.
That's fantastic.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. And I also am aware that the OECD has flagged a number of opportunities for green economic stimulus through investing in ecosystem restoration. I'm just wondering if I will see some of that also in another section?
No, not that we're aware of, no.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. So that wasn't brought forward.
Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. I guess that's a question I can ask to the department instead. I'm good for now.
Thank you. Shall this section carry? Total capital expenditure, environment, water, and climate change, $1,756,000. Shall it carry? We are now on page 13, capital expenditure, finance. 2021, 2022, budget estimate, equipment. Appropriations provided for the information technology optimization and system upgrades, technology asset management, $1,900,000. Corporate system upgrades, $8,358,100. Total equipment, $10,258,100. Shall this section carry? Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. So we've had a lot of discussions in the Records Management Committee on the system upgrades and the amount of work required. I'm just checking that the corporate system upgrade, the very large expense, that's related to the Microsoft 365 mostly.
That's correct.
Leader of the Opposition.
And if I were to flip to the end, I'm sure I could find this, but it might be quicker to ask. How many years of capital expenditure are there? I mean, obviously there will be ongoing licenses and things like that, but in terms of the capital expense, how many years are we? I think it was going to be over 18 months of transition. So is the full capital expense for Microsoft 365 going to be over 2 years?
They're showing in this part of it over 2 years, correct, 21, 22, and 22, 23. But as you had indicated, once we get into this Microsoft environment, it is very much a license-based cost, so the operating budget will be affected as well.
Leader of the Opposition.
Just so my own clarity there, so licensing costs become, that's part of operating budget? Yeah, okay, but the purchase of the actual system is a capital expense.
And it's really the transformation and the infrastructure to support the actual software, whether it be servers and things like that, but the actual project conversion gets capitalized. The ongoing parts of the licensing, it turns to the operating budget.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. In moving to Microsoft 365, were there any hardware expenses associated with that? You know, were the servers that we're currently using, are they appropriate for Microsoft 365?
They're in a constant state of upgrade for servers, so there's money in the budget for constant upgrade of servers, so I default the answer is that they will. If they don't have it, they will have it. I don't have the specifics on what's in the project plan related to the actual expenditures, but the fact that it's kind of over 2 years, they expect to get it up and running with the tools and resources required.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Chair. Are any of the capital expenses here related to the malware attack that happened earlier this year?
There is one, I believe, they call it a security and event management system. So that's sort of a tracker, a gatekeeper to monitor the activity of what our network is under on a regular basis. They did see a need to upgrade that particular sort of piece of software, and it's within this capital budget for the next fiscal year.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. There was a lot of talk, again, in the Records Management Committee about the importance of records management and of how we collect and store records. And that generally does not come cheap. And I'm wondering whether, and it was made patently obvious to members of the committee that what we've been doing to this point is, it was not best practices, let me put it that way, that if we're going to aim for gold standard records management here on Prince Edward Island, that we're going to need to up our game in terms of looking after the records. Is there any capital expense this year put aside to improve our RIM strategy?
Really, as I understand RIM, it's more of a way of doing the business. So I'm not sure that there's a real capital component to it. It's almost a day-to-day way of doing business, and I know the RIM office is working diligently on sort of some of the training that's required and some of the information that needs to go out to staff to be mindful of what is a record and how to handle a record. Within the capital budget, as they get into storing the information required as a result of records management, I believe the investments are in here for the servers and the backbones and the things like that to manage the process once the activities and the practices continuously improve.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. The digitization of records you've just described is a big part of modern best practices records management, and that requires obviously a certain amount of storage space, and storage is not enormously expensive as it used to be, but it's still not cheap. But in order to digitize those records, you need some really good scanners and things like that. And would that fall under this budget as well, this portion?
Depending on the size, we do have a minimum threshold for what is considered in equipment to be capitalized. So it has to meet a couple of tests on length of how long we're going to have it and how much it's going to cost us. So on the scanners, my experience would be that they're not as big and robust. They're more widespread. They kind of need more of them rather than one big one type of thing. So it would be more towards the operational side of the budget.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks. One other aspect of records management is storage of actual hard copy records that you cannot digitize or have to keep the hard copy. You need the original copies. And I know, again, there was some discussions in the committee about the shortage of space for looking after that. And again, presumably there will be at some point a capital expense in order to expand our storage capacity, both in terms of the size, but also the climate control and all of the things that we need to do to manage and maintain our records properly. Do we see any of that in this year's budget or perhaps down the road?
I read somewhere where there was a humidification system that was purchased for the records management, and I'll have to dig it up to see whether it was in the current fiscal year.
We can bring that back, honourable member. Yeah.
Okay.
Leader of the Opposition.
I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to touch on upgrades to, I guess, Access PEI. So the infrastructure, the software, the program that's used within Access PEI for Department of Highways and all the transactions that are used, would that fall under this section, and is there a plan to upgrade that software?
In anticipation of your question, I did reach out to the department, and I was, ITSS had indicated they have been working with Access PEI staff and TIE staff to address the recommendations brought forward by the Auditor General. When they get in behind, definitely the systems can be improved, but I think the majority of the recommendations were business practice related, and they had made some significant improvements on those business practices to address the recommendations of the Auditor General.
Mermaid Stratford.
Right, and I appreciate that, Gordon. I feel like I've gotten predictable, have I?
That's not a bad thing.
No. So is what I'm hearing that it's not actually software upgrades that will be required to fix that at this point in time? Fix those
What I was advised was that for sure, is it a brand new system that is, leading edge? Absolutely not. Could it be upgraded at any point in time? Yes. Is it meeting the needs of what they are doing there every day? Yes. So it'll be sort of upgraded when it absolutely is required to be upgraded. But at now, I think it's meeting the needs, and we were able to address the majority of the recommendations through some minor changes to business practices and some modifications for sure.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Great, and I'm glad to hear that. I'd also like to talk about the life cycle of it, though. I mean, when we look at IT programs, the life cycle's not that long, and it is one of the departments that, you know, does probably, like, I'm not gonna say does the largest amount of transactions annually, but it would be one of the ones that's way up there. So do you have a sense as to when that will be end of life and when they'll have to upgrade that system?
No, I don't have that particular information, but I do know that the digitization of government and modernization is an ongoing project, and they're working with each department to identify the services, and obviously Access PEI as being a front-facing service for government would be high on the priority list to get completed for sure.
Mermaid Stratford.
Yeah, and I'd hope so too. I'm just looking at the AG report now, and in 2013-14, Access PEI processed over 324,000 transactions. I'm not sure if we have any sense as to how many they do today. I would think that that's probably grown at this point in time, but that's being speculative of me. So, anyway, I would be just interested in knowing what that lifespan is, and if we're planning for that in the future, so that we can support with that many transactions happening, and they totaling $34 million, and that was 7 years ago, right? Like, I would assume it's much higher than that, and given what we've gone through with data breaches and anything, where do we stand with that system? But I appreciate the answers, so thank you.
You're welcome. Cornwall Meadowbank.
On the budget, it seems to be a trend that it's getting smaller for this department. I'm just kind of wondering, with everything that we just talked about, would it not be increasing?
Actually, over the 5-year window, this budget is pretty much the same. It's the year to year may change a little bit, but over the 5-year window, this 5-year segment versus the previous 5-year segment is $18,300 larger.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
How much did you say, Gord, please?
$18,300.
Okay.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
Over 5 years.
Okay. Thank you, that's fine, Chair.
Okay, shall the section carry? Capital improvements. Appropriations provided for capital improvements, facility improvements, $360,000. Total capital improvements, $360,000. Shall the section carry? Total capital expenditure finance, $10,618,100. Shall it carry? Moving on to page 15, capital expenditures, fisheries and communities, 2021-2022 budget estimate, equipment, appropriations provided for equipment purchases, field equipment, $25,000. Total equipment, $25,000. Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So 25,000. So what does that cover exactly? What type of field equipment?
Do you have that, Gord? I don't have it.
Yep, in the current fiscal year, a floating dock system was installed. For the next fiscal year, their plans is to buy a compound microscope with camera and outboard motors.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. And I know that the minister has put forward a request to the federal government for $750 million worth of infrastructure investments in the fisheries. Some of the concerns I'm hearing about are perhaps, I don't know if they would fall under the federal jurisdiction or not. So I'm thinking about things like when there's I'll give you an example that happened in my district. There was a slip that was in a private location that's been used publicly by fishers for a very long time, no issues. But it was the property was sold and developed for cottages, and that slip is no longer accessible, limiting access for fishers. Could that be something, if we had allotted budget for that, to put a new slip in, or does that have to be federal funding?
Well, if it's private, then that would be the first hurdle.
Can I clarify my question? I don't mean a slip on the private property. I mean a slip somewhere else to replace the one that is now inaccessible, because it is on private property and that owner so chooses not to make it accessible. That is their choice, but the fishers are out of luck in that area. So I'm just wondering, why did we not consider any funding for those sorts of projects that come up to make sure that we're able to respond to the needs of fishers?
That's, I guess, a question you could ask the minister. We take the numbers that are given to us, the requests that are put forward to us from departments, and we know it's a very small amount for fisheries, but most of it is federal, and I look forward to the minister furthering that request for $750 million.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair, and I would, welcome an intervention if one were on offer.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, do you have a question?
No, okay, so, yeah, because it's really hard to say whether or not I would want to pass a section in the budget without really understanding or having clarity on what could possibly be covered here provincially. Obviously, this department is quite unique in that there is a lot that is covered federally or that would be under federal jurisdiction. So to see just, $25,000, it leaves, no space for any sort of contingency if there's, an emergency request of any kind. It would seem that we might want to have some space in this budget for infrastructure response that might need to happen immediately, that instead of always relying on the federal government, which of course is outside of the scope of what this provincial government can control.
Yeah. If there's, Honourable Member, if there's something that comes up that's unexpected or an emergency, the request would come to Treasury Board, and at that point we would determine, to deny it or to approve it. And we've seen it before that can happen, but just the ongoing capital expenditures for agriculture are about equipment and what the department actually needs on an ongoing basis to operate.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, no, so that's.
The hour has been called.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Shall carry?
Carry.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House having under consideration the grant of capital supply to Her Majesty, I beg leave to report that the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall I carry? The Honourable Member from Morale Donner, the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier, that this House do adjourn until Thursday, November 26th till 2 o'clock in the p.m.
Shall I carry? Enjoy your evening, members.